Chapter 116. Zhang Xiaohua put down the book and roughly explained the situation to his second brother. Naturally, Zhang Xiaohu was still concerned about his right hand. Helpless, Zhang Xiaohua could only raise his right hand in front of his second brother and bend his 5 fingers a few times. Looking at his brother's somewhat thin right hand and his somewhat nimble fingers, Zhang Xiaohu felt somewhat gratified. He was also filled with hope that Zhang Xiaohua's right hand would recover to its original state. After chatting for a while, Zhang Xiaohua finally asked the main question. Second brother, how's your internal energy practice going? Hearing Zhang Xiaohua's question, Zhang Xiaohu's eyes couldn't hide the excitement in them as he said, "Why don't you guess?" Seeing his second brother's expression, Zhang Xiaohua naturally knew. Pleasantly surprised, he said, "Second brother, did you succeed?" Zhang Xiaohu said, "Yes, a few days after coming back from your place, I successfully found a sense of qi." Zhang Xiaohua asked, "Then second brother, does finding a sense of qi mean that you've successfully practiced the internal energy practice method?" Zhang Xiaohu shook his head and said, "It's still early. Finding a sense of qi is only the beginning. The road ahead is still very long. Being able to find a sense of qi means that I can practice internal energy. With a direction, I can gather qi in my dantian and lay the foundation for circulating qi in my body's meridians in the future. If I can't even find a sense of qi, then there's no way for me to practice the internal energy practice method." These words made Zhang Xiaohua's head full of fog. Although he had read a lot of books during this period of time, and even read books about Wuxia, he had never come into contact with anything related to internal energy practice methods. Zhang Xiaohu's professional names made him scratch his head. He could only ask, "Second brother, can you tell me what is a sense of qi dantian, and qi gathering and circulating qi?" Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's expression, Zhang Xiaohu thought for a moment before getting up to take a look outside the door. Only after closing the door did he say to Zhang Xiaohua, "Actually, these names are very common things that anyone who wants to practice internal energy practice methods must know. It can't be considered confidential." Although the third master Chu said that the contents of the internal energy practice method cannot be revealed, I don't think these common sense things should be covered in this scope. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he said, "Second brother, if you really can't tell me, then forget it. I'll go back and ask Captain." Zhang said, "If I can't tell you, then I won't tell you. Since I can tell you these things, why should I ask someone else?" Zhang Xiaohua happily jumped up and said, "I know that second brother is good to me. Then hurry up and tell me." Zhang Xiaohu organized his thoughts and tirelessly said, "When it comes to internal energy, first we have to talk about the meridians. The meridians are the channels in our body that can circulate qi. Through these channels, qi can be sent to all parts of the body. When you use qi to make moves, there is also internal energy. Do you understand, Xiaohua?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "I understand. When a normal person makes a punch, they only have their own strength. If there is qi in the meridians of the fist, then there is also internal energy. Is it like this?" Zhang Xiaohu nodded and said, "That's right. Therefore, cultivating internal energy is a process of accumulating qi. The accumulation of qi is a process from nothing. This process is called qi sensing. When there is qi sensing, then there is the first thread of qi. Usually, true qi was stored in a place called the dantian. It was right here, below the navel. When cultivating or exercising, true qi would come out of the dantian and flow along the meridians of the whole body, or wherever you wanted it to go. Generally speaking, the process of circulating energy is the process of gathering qi. The more qi you use, the more internal energy you will have." Zhang Xiaohua seemed to be deep in thought as he said, "Last time, when Yu Dai used that purple sand palm, he used his inner strength. Could it be that he transferred his true qi from his dantian to his palm to produce such a large amount of power?" Zhang Xiaohu nodded and said, "Yes, the transfer of qi is a strict process. It has to follow a fixed route and cannot be disturbed. If there is a slight disturbance, then it will deviate from the original route and run into a fork in the road. If it is light, then it will lose control of the body. If it is heavy, then it will lose its life. This is what is often called qi deviation. Actually, when we practiced before, we didn't use qi, so we wouldn't have qi deviation, hee. Only then did Zhang Xiaohua realize that this was what qi deviation looked like. Then Zhang Xiaohua continued to ask, then how is qi produced? Is it from the soles of the feet? Or is it produced from the fingers? Connecting it to the sudden hot and cold feeling and the way it moved in his body, Zhang Xiaohua faintly felt that it wasn't the qi that second brother was talking about. Instead, it was the warm current produced when he used the sword that was similar to qi. However, it did come from his shoulder and not from his dantian. Zhang Xiaohu thought for a bit and said, this question, I don't know if every qi cultivation method is the same. When I practice, I sit there with my 5 hearts facing the sky. My nose looks at my mouth and my mouth looks at my heart. Then I place my tongue on the top of my mouth and imagine the qi flowing from my forehead. Then I swallow it with the saliva in my mouth and guide the qi to my dantian. This process is very important. I have been doing this for a while, and only recently have I truly gathered qi in my dantian. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. This process was very different from his own. However, he still didn't give up and asked, second brother, does qi have to be stored in the dantian? Does it go in from one part of the body and out from another part of the body? Zhang Xiaohu was stunned and frowned. This I can't say. However, I heard from the third master Chu that the dantian is the center of qi. Without the dantian, you can't practice qi cultivation. Moreover, the martial arts of the Jiang who crippled people are aimed at breaking that person's dantian. I think that without the dantian, it might not be possible. Also, qi is transported out from the dantian when you want to use it. If it goes in from one part of the body and out from another, then how do you use it? Can it be called qi? Then he asked, Xiaohua, why do you ask so many unimaginable things? Zhang Xiaohua opened his mouth and wanted to tell the truth. However, when he thought of what second brother said about the consequences of qi deviation, he was afraid that it would affect second brother's cultivation. Moreover, he didn't know what it was, and if he told him, second brother would be worried. He might as well hide it from him. It wouldn't be too late to tell him after he figured it out. After making up his mind, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, aren't I just curious about qi cultivation? It's not easy to find someone who knows about it, so why don't I ask a bit more? Zhang Xiaohu patted his chest and said with a worried expression. The third master Chu also said that qi cultivation is very dangerous. Usually, it has to be done under the guidance of an experienced master. Otherwise, it's very easy to go into qi deviation. You can't blindly cultivate it. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I know, second brother. I do want to cultivate it, but where would I get the qi cultivation method? Zhang Xiaohu also smiled and said, that's true. Then Zhang Xiaohu asked about Zhang Xiaohua's Liuhe fist. When he heard that Zhang Xiaohua only remembered 7 moves, he was flabbergasted and didn't know how to comfort Zhang Xiaohua. However, when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua himself didn't think much of it, he didn't say anything. In fact, he still wanted to ask him how he was doing with the fist technique. However, he thought that it wouldn't be good news. He was afraid that he would reopen the scar in his brother's heart and make him sad, so he didn't mention it again. The two brothers met and chatted casually. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, half a day had passed. When the sky was almost dark, Zhang Xiaohua said goodbye to her second brother and returned to Huanxi Manor. When she returned to Huanxi Manor, the sky was already dark. Walking on the small path of Huanxi Manor with a few books on medicinal herbs in her hands, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel amused. She remembered that she had made a joke to Li Jinfeng last time, and he actually took it seriously. He was really... No, when she thought of the last time Li Jinfeng came to Huanxi Manor, Zhang Xiaohua immediately understood that this young master Li was really considerate. That's enough. It's not that easy to get into the Misty School's cafeteria. He Tianshu didn't hold back and said honestly. It hurt her pride. Zhang Xiaohua's expression didn't look too good. Unexpectedly, He Tianshu said, if you were admitted to the Misty School when you were young, you might have been assigned to the Divine Engineering Hall. Zhang Xiaohua's face lit up and said, Divine Engineering Hall? That sounds very impressive. What's it for? He Tianshu said. The Misty Sect has long had weapons. The strength of your hands is something they envy. I see. Zhang Xiaohua completely understood that He Tianshu wasn't interested in her talent. However, it was strange. She didn't have such great strength in the past. How did she become so powerful now? Could it be because of the spring water? Just as she was thinking, He Tianshu asked, By the way, why are you here? Zhang Xiaohua then remembered why she came into the room and asked, Captain He, I've noticed that you've been frowning recently. I heard from Nye that it's because of those medicinal herbs that won't germinate. Yes, it's been almost a year. I'm a little worried. He Tianshu sighed and couldn't help but tell Zhang Xiaohua. These medicinal herbs were planted at the beginning of this year. I don't know why, but they won't germinate. Actually, it's fine for me to stay here. But if I go on like this, I'll ruin the sect's important matters. Many medicines rely on these medicinal herbs, so as he spoke, he suddenly stopped and seemed to realize that he had lost his composure. He said embarrassedly, Anyway, I feel a little guilty. Zhang Xiaohua raised the book in her hand and said, Oh, when I went to the escort agency to look for second brother, young Master Li Jinfeng gave me a few books on medicinal herbs. I wanted to show them to you to see if they would be of any help. He Tianshu heard this and smiled as he patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and said, Zhang Xiaohua, thank you. You really put in a lot of effort. However, He Tianshu took the books and roughly skimmed through them. He said apologetically, Although I can read, it's only limited to martial arts books. I can't understand these things. Moreover, the group of elders in the pharmacy hall study this every day. They probably read a lot. If there was a solution to this, they would have discovered it long ago. However, Zhang Xiaohua disagreed and said, The contents of these books were written by people. Everyone may not see the same things and experience the same things. The ancients said that there are benefits to pooling the wisdom of the masses. He Tianshu was speechless. He didn't have the experience of learning the Fist of the North Star from an ordinary fist manual. Naturally, he scoffed. However, he immediately thought of something and said, How about this, Zhang Xiaohua? Among us, you are the only one who has an outstanding talent in literature, meaning, your martial arts talent is a mess. This task will be handed to you. Take a look at these books first. Then, if it's not enough, I'll borrow more from the pharmacy hall for you. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. What was this? I was only kindly recommending an idea to you. And you're putting this task on me? Will you still let me speak in the future? Every time she provided a reasonable suggestion, he would say, Good idea, I'll leave it to you. Who could stand this? It was purely bureaucratic. However, regarding He Tianshu's orders, Zhang Xiaohua was unable to refuse. She could only nod and agree. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's helpless expression, He Tianshu was equally helpless. Giving such a burden to a half-grown child was because he didn't want to extinguish Zhang Xiaohua's enthusiasm. It was also because he wanted to make a Hail Mary effort. It would be best if he could find a solution, but it didn't matter if he couldn't. It was just letting him read a few more books. However, the outcome was probably the latter. He Tianshu could guess it even with his heels. Zhang Xiaohua's head drooped. She carried a few books back to her house and lit an oil lamp. She didn't rush to open the books. Instead, she turned around and lit the lantern. She went out to the woods to practice her fist and sword techniques. Sword techniques were used to protect one's life. Naturally, the more proficient one was the better. After many days of practice, the speed at which the warm current flowed from her shoulder to her fingertips seemed to have sped up. The speed at which she drew the sword with her left hand also seemed to have sped up. Moreover, the angle at which she drew the sword seemed to be stranger than before. Zhang Xiaohua simply couldn't figure out how she practiced the sword with her left hand. Could it be that the changes in this move would evolve as she practiced? The sword in her right hand was still the same. It didn't change along with the sword in her left hand. However, her right hand's fingers clearly felt more flexible. The injury was developing in the expected direction. What made Zhang Xiaohua most excited was the Big Dipper magical fist that she had pieced together. The 108 moves didn't have any changes like the sword in her left hand. Instead, it was the same as what she had learned before. Although it was different from what was taught or recorded in the fist manual, It had already been fixed. The feeling of flowing still appeared once after 9 consecutive practice. The only change was that in her perception, the flow seemed to have grown a little stronger. However, Zhang Xiaohua was still a little depressed. How good would it be if this flow could stay in her body? She could also use it. What was the use of it appearing and disappearing for no reason? Could it be that it was traveling in her body? She really couldn't understand. After her daily practice, Zhang Xiaohua returned to her house. She found the book she had already read in the morning, and continued to read it with relish. Anyway, she had finished reading all the books in her house, and there was no place to find something to read for the time being. Now Zhang Xiaohua had developed a good habit of reading. It was impossible not to read on weekdays. She would just treat these professional books as a pastime in her spare time. Therefore, in Zhang Xiaohua's life, in addition to the daily 3 times of practice in the morning, afternoon, and evening, there was an additional subject of reading. Other than working in the medicinal field, Zhang Xiaohua was holding a book. Zhang Xiaohua didn't just simply read. Most of the time, she also compared the contents of the book with the combination of theory and practice. However, the medicinal field managed by He Tianshu was small after all, and there were not many varieties. Moreover, there were many medicinal herbs that were not recorded in the book. As a last resort, Zhang Xiaohua often went to Tian Zhongxi's medicinal field to look for the real thing. Tian Zhongxi didn't mind. After all, he was a manager. He never got tired of asking. He appreciated Zhang Xiaohua's learning attitude very much. However, Ma Jing and the others in green didn't think so. Perhaps they were jealous that Zhang Xiaohua had a first-class meal. Or perhaps they were jealous that Zhang Xiaohua could read and write. Their sarcastic words were endless. How could Zhang Xiaohua listen to them? She just treated it as a dog barking. Just in this constant barking and the ground full of chicken feathers, the days passed day by day. Chapter 117. However, when Zhang Xiaohua finished reading those books, she discovered that these books seemed to be too basic. She had a feeling that they were not enough to quench her thirst. If she wanted to use the things she learned from these books to solve the problem of medicinal herbs not germinating, it would be wishful thinking. Helpless, Zhang Xiaohua could only throw these books on the Kong bed. When she was bored, she would flip through them again. Without new books to read, Zhang Xiaohua once again lived a monotonous life of working and cultivating. Although reading books was a good habit, Zhang Xiaohua would never buy books for the sake of reading. Books could not be read unless they were borrowed. Zhang Xiaohua felt the same way in her heart. On the other hand, He Tianshu was used to seeing Zhang Xiaohua running around with books. Not long after, he discovered Zhang Xiaohua's abnormality. He asked with interest, thinking that Zhang Xiaohua had given up on her research. However, when he heard Zhang Xiaohua's reason, he didn't believe it at first. However, when he thought about how this person in front of him used Shuo Wen Jiezi to enlighten her, his brows relaxed. He snapped his right hand and said, "Isn't that easy?" Then he muttered in Nie Xiao Er's ear for a moment. Nie Xiao Er listened while sizing up Zhang Xiaohua from the corner of his eyes, making Zhang Xiaohua's hair stand on end. What was he doing? After he finished muttering, Nie Xiao Er left to carry out his orders. He Tianshu beamed at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "All right, you wait. I'll show you my methods in a while." Zhang Xiaohua rolled her eyes and curled her lips, saying, "What methods are you playing? Making it so mysterious. I'll just wait." This Nie Xiao Er left for half a day. He only returned to the small courtyard empty-handed in the evening. Seeing Nie Xiao Er return empty-handed, He Tianshu was very shocked and asked, "You didn't do it?" Nie Xiao Er said, "Elder, he said that our hall's books are only for the disciples to read. They cannot be borrowed from outsiders." He Tianshu frowned. "You didn't look for hall master Bai?" Nie Xiao Er smiled bitterly and said, "I did, but hall master Bai didn't pay much attention to me. He only said that you're trying to find any doctor when you're seriously ill. How can a child without any foundation solve the problem by just reading books? He told you to think of another way. He also told me to tell you that he's also discussing this problem with the elders in the hall. He told you not to mess around." He Tianshu's face alternated between red and green as he looked into Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. He felt very embarrassed, but he seemed to have thought of something. His face relaxed as he said, Zhang Xiaohua, go back to your room first. I'll bring you those books in a while. Zhang Xiaohua looked at him curiously, nodded in agreement, and went straight back into the house. Since someone wanted to find books for him to read, of course he wouldn't refuse. Sure enough, not long after, Tianshu came back with a grin on his face carrying a pile of books. He piled them on Zhang Xiaohua's kong. He clapped his hands and said, All right, Zhang Xiaohua, I finally found the books for you. Read them well. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the pile of books on her kong in surprise and asked curiously, So many, where did Captain He get them? Tianshu pretended to be mysterious. Look at how powerful his methods are. How can such a small problem not be solved? He read carefully. Zhang Xiaohua, don't mind our hall master's words. I still say the same thing. It's best if it can be solved, but it's fine if it can't be solved. Just treat it as you reading books to broaden your horizons. Also, Tianshu muttered to himself. The Jianghu is dangerous. What can a child like you rely on? Learn more and you'll be able to live a good life. Zhang Xiaohua finally understood Tianshu's painstaking efforts. She couldn't help but feel grateful. Humans weren't plants. How could they be emotionless? She and Tianshu were neither relatives nor friends. Just living together for a short period of time, he took care of her in every possible way. Not only did he teach her fist techniques, he even pointed out the path for her future. It could be seen that this dangerous Jianghu wasn't just filled with traps and arrows. There was also warmth and care. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I understand, Captain He. I won't let you down. At least I have to learn more, right? Tianshu nodded. It's good that you understand. Read your books yourself. I'm leaving. After saying that, he smiled and walked out. Zhang Xiaohua sent him to the door. When he left the house, she was about to turn around when she saw Tianshu turn his head and say, Oh right, Zhang Xiaohua, I almost forgot. How's your practice of fist techniques? We haven't practiced together in a long time. Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile. It's all right, Captain He. I mixed the fist techniques you taught me and some of the fist techniques my second brother taught me together. I can practice them too. Tianshu smiled and said, Not bad, Zhang Xiaohua. You know how to create your own techniques. You're promising. Practice well. When you have the chance, let me see it. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Okay, no problem, Captain He. I can do it anytime. Tianshu said, You won't forget this time? Zhang Xiaohua said, I won't. Don't worry. Tianshu said, Okay then. When I have the time, I'll see it. You read your books too. I'm leaving. After saying that, he walked out of the house. Zhang Xiaohua saw him leave and was about to turn around when Tianshu turned his head again and said, Oh, I almost forgot. Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She turned around again and said, What is it, Captain He? Tianshu said, I borrowed the book from the village head. When she heard that you were reading it, she was very happy. She said that when you're done, she has more. You can go and get it. You can ask Qiu Tong for it. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was very happy and said, Really? That's great. Thank you, Captain He. Tianshu smiled and said, What are you thanking me for? Okay, go and read your books. After saying that, he walked out of the house. Zhang Xiaohua watched him leave. This time, she didn't turn around and waited quietly. Tianshu was about to leave when he remembered something. He turned around and said, Oh, I almost forgot. Zhang Xiaohua, when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua was still standing there and looking at him with a smile and didn't turn around, he was stunned and said, Zhang Xiaohua, why aren't you reading? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I'm waiting for Captain He to tell me about, I almost forgot again. Tianshu smiled and said, I see. It's like this then. His expression became very strange. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, What's wrong? Tianshu pursed his lips and said, I really forgot this time. Forget it, I won't talk about it. I'll tell you when I remember. After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the house. Zhang Xiaohua didn't move. She quietly waited for Tianshu to leave. Then, she stuck her head out and watched as Tianshu walked away and patted his forehead. When he entered his room, Zhang Xiaohua felt relieved. She closed the door and went to read on the Kong bed. Tianshu entered the room. He was still thinking about what he wanted to say just now. Tianshu kept tossing and turning in bed until it was very late at night. Tianshu frowned and thought until a ray of light appeared on the horizon. Tianshu suddenly sat up and laughed. I finally remembered. I want to tell Zhang Xiaohua not to read too late and to pay attention to rest. With the new program, Zhang Xiaohua was naturally happy and forgot about home. Every day he read and practiced martial arts. He only hoped that these days would last. However, the more he read, the more he felt that the cultivation of medicinal herbs was complicated and profound. He really admired someone who could write so many things. At the same time, he was very grateful to Li Jinfeng for teaching him how to read. He was also very grateful to Huanqi Manor for giving him the opportunity to read. He was very grateful to the Manor Lord for lending these books to him. Finally, he also wanted to thank his parents for letting him out. Well, if he put his parents last, no one would say anything. By the way, when he saw the Manor Lord one day, should he mention to her to find a job for his parents? The more he knew, the more he didn't know. Zhang Xiaohua was now in this state. As Tianshu brought those books to read, Zhang Xiaohua felt more and more that he knew too little. In fact, he had forgotten his main purpose. He had forgotten to find the reason why those seeds didn't germinate. He actually agreed with the pharmacy hall master's words. It was impossible to solve the problem that Tianshu and the others encountered by simply reading a few books. In fact, if it could be solved by just reading books, then the pharmacy hall elder would have done it long ago. However, Zhang Xiaohua was already infatuated with this magical world of medicinal herbs. In the afternoon, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the house after practicing the fist technique. As usual, he picked up more books and prepared more. Only then did he remember that he had finished reading all the books last night. Zhang Xiaohua flipped through the books and felt very bored. Zhang Xiaohua had a bad habit of reading books. He didn't like to read a book a second time after reading it. Although Tianshu brought over a lot of books, it couldn't stop Zhang Xiaohua from reading them day and night. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua remembered that when Tianshu brought the books over, he said that if he finished reading all these books, he could go to the Manor Lord to borrow more. He could also find Qiu Tong. Thinking that he hadn't seen elder sister Qiu Tong for a long time, he wanted to take this opportunity to see her. After making up his mind, Zhang Xiaohua carried the books and went to look for Tianshu. The door to Tianshu's house was tightly shut. Zhang Xiaohua shouted outside for a long time, but no one answered. He must have gone out. This made Zhang Xiaohua worried. He had never entered the inner manor. He didn't know where elder sister Qiu Tong was, let alone the Manor Lord. Just as he was about to return to his house, Zhang Xiaohua remembered that he had looked for Elder Yu last time. Elder Yu definitely knew about it. He carried the books and entered through the small round door, walking towards the inner courtyard. After passing through a few courtyards, he arrived at Elder Yu's residence. Unfortunately, Elder Yu wasn't there either. Zhang Xiaohua felt discouraged. What day was it today? He didn't look at the almanac. Everything was going wrong. However, since he had already entered, he might as well continue to look around. If he saw one or two people, he could ask. He was also a member of the Misty Mountain Villa, so he wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. However, he forgot that the people in green clothes and hats and the few people from the medicine hall rarely entered the inner courtyard. That was where the girls lived. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was about to barge in, he suddenly heard someone scream. Where did this child come from? Why are you here? Zhang Xiaohua froze and couldn't help but stop in his tracks. Could they be talking about him? When he turned to look, there was indeed a girl standing under the shed in the small courtyard. She had washed clothes and was about to dry them. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly bowed and said, I'm Captain Tianshu's subordinate from the medicine fields outside. I want to come in to look for elder sister Qiu Tong. When the girl heard this, she looked puzzled. She put down the clothes and walked over. She looked Zhang Xiaohua up and down and said, Captain He's subordinate? Why haven't I heard of you before? You're so young. How did you come out of the medicine hall? Zhang Xiaohua naturally knew that she had misunderstood him as someone from the Misty School. It wasn't easy for him to explain, so he said, I just came here not long ago. I'm not from the medicine hall, so elder sister probably doesn't know me. You just have to look for elder sister Qiu Tong, and you'll naturally know. The girl felt that it made sense and said, Since you're new here, you might not know the rules of the villa. You can't trespass into the inner courtyard without orders. Seeing that you're still young, Captain, he must have been careless. You mustn't do this again. If the villa head finds out, you'll be caned. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. He stuck out his tongue and said, It's that serious. I really didn't know. However, he cursed inwardly. Seriously, Captain, why didn't he tell me in detail and made me look for the villa head myself? The feeling of being caned on the but is probably not good. Why didn't Tian Zhongxi say anything? How strange. Actually, this was also a misunderstanding. Tian Zhongxi and Tian Shu knew that he was someone brought in by Qiu Tong, and thought that Qiu Tong had already explained the rules of the villa to him. Qiu Tong also saw him as her younger brother, and naturally felt that there was nothing to hide. Moreover, after bringing Zhang Xiaohua in, they originally wanted to give her some instructions. However, they were stopped by the villa head's words of work on your own, and had long forgotten about it. What was even more amazing was that Zhang Xiaohua had been recuperating in the escort agency for several months. In everyone's eyes, he was already an old person. In fact, he was still very fresh. However, he was indeed young, and the girl didn't mind. She said, Don't go in any further. I'll help you look for Qiu Tong. Then she quickly walked in. Zhang Xiaohua could only wait there and look curiously at the small courtyard. This courtyard was slightly smaller than the one Zhang Xiaohua and the others were staying in. However, it was unusually clean, and there were even some flowers and plants planted in the corners. It was easy for Zhang Xiaohua to think of his sister-in-law. Didn't Lu Qian like to plant flowers and plants in the courtyard? When he saw the clothes that the girl was about to dry, he lowered his head and thought for a moment. Then he walked forward and placed the books he was carrying on the stone table. He washed his hands with the clean water in the basin, and helped to dry the clothes in the basin one by one. Zhang Xiaohua used to help his mother do these things when he was at home. Naturally, he was familiar with the process and finished it in a short while. Moreover, when he was drying the clothes, he couldn't help but think about his family. Then Zhang Xiaohua hugged the books and waited at the door. Zhang Xiaohua quickly said, Young Master Li also gave me a few books like this at the beginning. However, seeing that Qiu Tong didn't seem to want to talk about this, she quickly added, However, I think that just reading these books and only studying the theory isn't enough. It's best to combine it with practice. This theory comes from practice, but it's better than practice. Experts record their practice into books for us to study. After we've finished learning, we still have to return to practice. Only then can we truly test the theory and turn it into our own knowledge. This is true knowledge from practice. When Qiu Tong heard this, she couldn't help but stop and say, Who told you this? When Zhang Xiaohua saw that Qiu Tong had stopped, she also stopped and said, I learned all of this from reading these books. Am I wrong? Qiu Tong smiled and said, You're not wrong. It seems that the village head often says these things. I thought that someone else told you. All right, let's go. The village head and the others seem to have something to do in the hall. I'll help you find the books. Please bookmark it, thank you. Chapter 118. However, Qiu Tong changed her mind after walking a short distance with Zhang Xiaohua. Ouyang had not told Qiu Tong what books she was going to give to Zhang Xiaohua. Moreover, it was inappropriate to bring someone into the Manor Master's study without the Manor Master's permission. Therefore, Qiu Tong brought Zhang Xiaohua to the main hall. As soon as they got close to the main hall, Zhang Xiaohua heard two people talking inside. One of them had a very pleasant voice, like an oriole flying out of a valley. One would never get tired of listening to it for a long time. The other person's enunciation was smooth and unhurried, but it did not have that kind of charm. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but think that the person with the pleasant voice was the Manor Master, Ouyang. In fact, Zhang Xiaohua had already started guessing Ouyang's appearance and voice when she came to the inner courtyard. She had been at Huanqi Manor for several months, and Oyen had treated her very well. However, she had never seen her before. This time, she was here not only to return the books, but also to thank Oyen in person for taking care of her. Qiu Tong asked Zhang Xiaohua to wait outside the room while she went in to report. After Qiu Tong entered the main hall, the two people inside stopped talking. Zhang Xiaohua heard Qiu Tong say from inside, "Manor Master, Zhang Xiaohua from the herb field is here to return your books. He wants to borrow some more. What books do you want to borrow from him?" At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's ears perked up. She wanted to know who the voice was. Unfortunately, to her disappointment, the gentle voice said, He's finished reading so quickly? Could it be that this fellow was just randomly flipping through the books? Let him in. I'll ask him. If he really reads them and understands them, it won't be too late to borrow them then." It turned out that the extremely pleasant voice was not Oyen's voice. Qiu Tong came out and gestured for Zhang Xiaohua to enter the room. When Zhang Xiaohua entered the room carefully, she saw a dignified and beautiful woman in her 20s sitting at the front of the hall. Her temperament was similar to Lu Qian's, and her skin was fair and smooth. If it weren't for the fact that the woman in front of her had phoenix eyes and Lu Qian's almond-shaped eyes, Zhang Xiaohua would have called her sister-in-law. On the other side of the hall sat a middle-aged woman with ordinary features. Her skin was dark and coarse, and although her clothes were bright, they couldn't hide her bucket-like waist. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Could it be that the voice that had been reverberating for 3 days had come from this woman? At this moment, Oyen spoke, "Are you Zhang Xiaohua?" Zhang Xiaohua quickly retracted her gaze and bowed deeply. "Yes, Sister Manorhead, I am Zhang Xiaohua." Oyen was a little stunned, and almost laughed out loud. "Sister? Haha, it's been a long time since someone called me sister." Oyen heard him say this and her expression relaxed and said, "If that's the case, I'll ask you a few questions." After saying this, Oyen flipped through the books and picked a few questions for Zhang Xiaohua to answer. In Zhang Xiaohua's eyes, these questions weren't questions at all. They were written clearly in the books, so he answered them fluently without thinking. When Oyen saw that Zhang Xiaohua answered quickly, she was very happy and picked a few questions that weren't in the books for him to answer. This time, Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment, and answered the questions that he thought were appropriate based on the knowledge he had read. Oyen was even more happy when she heard this. After pointing out the inconsistencies in Zhang Xiaohua's answers, she said, "Zhang Xiaohua, I didn't expect you to be so proficient in these books. Very good. Wait here, I'll bring out more books for you to read. If there's anything you don't understand, come and ask me." After saying this, she excused herself from Aunt Qin, and left with Qiu Tong with a face full of smiles. Only Aunt Qin and Zhang Xiaohua were left in the main hall. When Aunt Qin saw Zhang Xiaohua standing there obediently with his head lowered, she started chatting with him, and asked about Zhang Xiaohua's recent situation. Zhang Xiaohua didn't hide anything from this good-natured older sister. He told her about how he came to Pingyang City, how he came to Huanqi Mountain Villa, and how he got injured. He only left out the part about the Fist of the North Star and the sword technique. When Aunt Qin heard about Zhang Xiaohua's encounter, she couldn't help but sigh. She thought about her own childhood and couldn't help but feel closer to Zhang Xiaohua. Just as they were talking, Oyen returned. Behind her, Qiu Tong actually carried a white cloth bag that looked very heavy. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly ran over to take it. It was heavy in his hands too. He guessed that there were many books inside. Oyen sat down and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, these are the books I picked out according to your situation. Read them well. Just now, I heard from Qiu Tong that you actually know how to combine theory with practice. That's really not bad. You have to continue on this path. Go as far as you can. It will be beneficial for both you and the villa." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Okay, Sister O. I will work hard to read and practice. I hope I can help Sister O solve the problem of the seeds." At the mention of the seeds, Oyen couldn't hide the frown on her face. She said, "Your hopes are good. However, if I could find the reason just by reading these books, I would have found it long ago." Zhang Xiaohua was a little embarrassed. It seemed like she had made up her mind at the wrong time. She said, "As the saying goes, 3 cobblers are better than Zhuge Liang. If we all think of a solution together, there might be hope. Oyen smiled and said, what you said makes sense, but many things can't be solved with more people. We still need senior people to deal with it. Then Oyen pondered for a moment and said, Zhang Xiaohua, read these books first. After a while, I will take you to see a real expert. You can see how they treat herbs. Hearing this, Qiu Tong's expression changed. She said, young miss, you've decided to go alone? Aunt Qin also said, Yinner, you have to think carefully. The journey is long, thousands of miles. Can your body handle it? Oyen smiled and said, big sister Qin, you don't have to worry about me. Although the journey is a little long, didn't Qiu Tong go there last time? My body isn't any weaker than Qiu Tong's. Why can't I go? Qiu Tong begged. Young miss, let me go again. You shoulder the fate of the villa. It's better for you to stay in the villa and take care of the situation. Let us do the running. Oyen smiled bitterly and said, a year has passed and there is still no movement from these seeds. This is a huge problem that concerns the strength of the Misty School. That day, I made a promise in front of Big Brother. If I can't solve it, won't I become a sinner in the sect? Aunt Qin also advised. These seeds have been lost for a long time. The specific method of planting them may have been lost long ago. Although you made a promise in front of the sect leader that day, most of them have been planted. Why care about this little bit? Oyen smiled bitterly and said, this little bit is the most important thing. Last time Qiu Tong went, they closed the door and refused to see us. They must think that we don't care enough. If I don't go, won't this path be cut off? Seeing that they couldn't persuade Oyen, Aunt Qin and Qiu Tong didn't say anything else. Only Zhang Xiaohua listened to the 3 of them, as if she was listening to a book from heaven. She didn't know what they were talking about. It seemed that when she was injured, Qiu Tong said that she went to the south and didn't come to see her. From what she heard, she went to ask someone to solve the problem of the seeds. However, that person felt that Qiu Tong's identity wasn't right and refused to see her. Qiu Tong returned empty-handed. Now Oyen wanted to go personally. From what she heard, she wanted to bring her along. The other 2 felt that Oyen's identity was noble and were afraid that something would happen. So they stopped her. Zhang Xiaohua understood. Seeing that the 3 of them weren't interested, she quickly thanked Oyen for borrowing the book and was about to leave. Oyen smiled and said a few more words of encouragement before letting Qiu Tong take her away. Qiu Tong wasn't in a good mood. She brought Zhang Xiaohua to Qiuju's courtyard with a dark expression and said, Zhang Xiaohua, next time if you want to find me or the manor head, don't rush in rashly. Although you're young, you still have to abide by the manor's rules. If you see Qiuju or anyone else here, let them come in to find me, all right? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I know, big sister Qiu Tong. Don't be unhappy. I'm sure there'll be a solution. Qiu Tong forced a smile and said, I know. Xiaohua, you should work hard too. I hope you can help. Qiu Tong watched as Zhang Xiaohua walked away with a bag of books. Only then did she turn and walk away quickly. Zhang Xiaohua walked back with a large bag of books in her left hand. Luckily, Zhang Xiaohua had the strength of 250 kilograms in one arm. That was why she seemed so light. If it were anyone else, it would be difficult. She didn't know how Qiu Tong had carried the books from the study to the living room. When Zhang Xiaohua returned to the room, she threw the bag on the Kong bed and drank some water. When she opened it, her eyes widened involuntarily. My goodness, there really are a lot of books. There are at least a few dozen books. No wonder it's so heavy. However, Zhang Xiaohua was immediately overjoyed. With so many books, she would have something to rely on for the long night. At night, when Zhang Xiaohua finished practicing martial arts and casually opened a book, she suddenly realized that it was different from the previous books. First of all, the previous books were more basic, but these new books were obviously more profound. It was just right for Zhang Xiaohua's current level. Just a casual glance was enough to tickle Zhang Xiaohua's heart. She couldn't bear to let go of them. Secondly, the blank spaces of the previous books were as clean as before. However, these new books had more or less fine writing in the blank spaces of every page. There were only a few words in a few places, but there were many densely packed words that filled the entire page. When Zhang Xiaohua squinted her eyes to take a closer look, she realized that these words were written about the insights and experiences of reading this page. This was the first time that Zhang Xiaohua had encountered such a way of reading. Her eyes lit up, and she began to read carefully. The more Zhang Xiaohua read, the more shocked she was, and the more she admired the person who wrote this. The notes in the blank spaces not only highlighted the main points of the page, but also quoted from classics, and wrote a lot of things by analogy. It was enough to show that the reader's knowledge was profound. As she read, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly thought of something. She put down the book in her hand, picked up another book from the Kong and opened it. Sure enough, that book was also densely packed with notes. Then, Zhang Xiaohua casually picked up a few more books, and they were all the same. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that such beautiful handwriting belonged to none other than the Manor Lord, Oyen. Looking at such a large pile of books, Zhang Xiaohua was actually able to read them in such detail. Zhang Xiaohua felt admiration from the bottom of her heart. Also, she was filled with gratitude. This sister Manor Lord really treated her as an outsider, and generously lent her the books that she usually read. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua really put Sister O on the same level as her sister-in-law. With enough books to read, Zhang Xiaohua's life became rich. She worked in the herbal field, practiced martial arts in the forest, and read books under the light. With these three activities, Zhang Xiaohua was not lonely at all. However, in her free time, Zhang Xiaohua was also looking forward to a long journey. Previously, Sister Qiutong went on a long journey for a few months. She said that she was going to the south, and she really wanted to go out and take a look. The furthest she had ever been to in her life was Pingyang City, and it was only a few days' journey. From the books, the climate and living habits of the south were very different from Pingyang City. Moreover, many of the medicinal herbs were different from Pingyang City as well. If she could go and take a look personally, it would definitely be better than just reading books. Scholars often said that reading 10,000 books was equivalent to traveling 10,000 miles. Even Zhang Xiaohua now had this kind of pursuit. Scrolls were really good things to cultivate people's minds. However, the long journey did not come quickly because of Zhang Xiaohua's longing. After a few days, there was no news from anyone. Gradually, Zhang Xiaohua stopped thinking about it. One day, Zhang Xiaohua was working in the fields as usual when she saw He Tianshu bringing a few people over. The two people in front were old men with white hair and beards. Behind them were a few slightly younger people. Some of them looked gentle, while others looked strong and powerful. However, their attitude was the same as He Tianshu's. They were all very respectful to the two people. Zhang Xiaohua sighed. She had never seen team leader He like this before. These two people must be the higher-ups of the pharmacy hall. Anyway, she was not from the Misty School and did not need to be so respectful to them. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua lowered her body and carefully moved the soil and weeded the grass. She carefully looked at each herb and observed their condition. Unfortunately, things did not go as she wished. He Tianshu saw her from afar and did not intend to let her go. He was leading the group of people over. When they got closer, He Tianshu called out, "Zhang Xiaohua, come over here for a while." Zhang Xiaohua looked up helplessly. She picked up the hoe and walked over. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua approaching, He Tianshu said to her, "Zhang Xiaohua, quickly come and greet Hall Master Bai and Elder He from the pharmacy hall." Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly bowed deeply and said, "Greetings, Hall Master Bai, Elder He." He Tianshu smiled obsequiously and said to the purple-faced old man, "Hall Master Bai, this is Zhang Xiaohua that I mentioned to you before. She is very practical and capable. She is also extremely smart and has already read many books about medicinal herbs." The two people did not return the greeting. Only Hall Master Bai waved his hand slightly. Elder He nodded in agreement and did not say anything. He Tianshu still said somewhat tactfully, "Hall Master Bai, you see, Zhang Xiaohua is very eager to learn. There are many books in our pharmacy. Do you think you can lend one or two to her to broaden her horizons? After all, she also works in the medicine field. It is always good to learn more." Before Hall Master Bai could say anything, a middle-aged man next to him spoke up. He Tianshu, I think you have stayed in Huanxi Mountain Villa for too long and have long forgotten the rules of our Misty School. How can the books in this pharmacy be open to outsiders? He Tianshu said with a wry smile. I know this rule, Senior Brother Chang. But isn't this Zhang Xiaohua also a member of Huanxi Mountain Villa? She is not an outsider. Everyone, do you want to vote for the author? Please collect, thank you. He Tianshu walked in with a tired face and said, Zhang Xiaohua, hurry and pack your things. You're going out with me tomorrow. Zhang Xiaohua wasn't surprised and said, Okay, Captain He. Why are you in such a hurry? Why didn't you tell me during the day? He Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, I also just got the news. How could I tell you earlier? After he finished speaking, he turned and prepared to leave. However, he suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked back in surprise. And why didn't you ask where we were going? You seemed to know beforehand that we were going out. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I already gave a heads up when I went to borrow books from the village head. I thought we would leave early, but it dragged on for so long that I thought we weren't going. He Tianshu smiled and said, I see. However, as you said, it won't be easy to go out this time. I heard that our boss didn't agree, but he couldn't win against the village head. After a few arguments, he finally let us go. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, Boss? Who? He Tianshu said, It's the leader of our Misty School. Haha, he's our village head's biological brother. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. No wonder Huanxi Manor was so close to the Misty School. It should be the case since they were related by blood. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's expression, He Tianshu said, There have always been a lot of bloodshed in the pugilistic world. The leader of the Misty School felt sorry for his sister, and didn't want her to go far away. Originally, he sent Hallmaster Bai from our pharmacy to go, but unfortunately, Hallmaster Bai had some grudges with the person the village head was visiting. So it wasn't only our Hallmaster, but also the people from the pharmacy hall. Since the medicinal herbs were planted in Huanxi Manor, the village head felt that he didn't fulfill his duty and insisted on going. Also, I want to tell you something. As he spoke, He Tianshu's expression became mysterious. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said, It's not a secret, is it? Captain He, if it is, then don't tell me. I'm worried about my life. He Tianshu laughed and scolded. What kind of life-threatening news do you think I have? I want to know, but I don't have any channels or sources. Then he said with a look of longing, The village head is very knowledgeable and has deep attainments in many aspects. Her research on medicinal herbs alone is not inferior to our Hall Master Bai. This is also one of the reasons why she wants to go to the south. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, What kind of secret is this? I already knew. He Tianshu said in disbelief. How do you know this? The people in the manor know very little. Zhang Xiaohua picked up the book she was reading from the Kong and handed it to He Tianshu, saying, You'll know after you read it. He Tianshu opened it and couldn't help but be stunned. The night gradually deepened. Zhang Xiaohua was lying on the Kong. She was still thinking about He Tianshu's instructions before he went out. Don't tell anyone about going out tomorrow. I will call you tomorrow morning, and we will leave quietly. Zhang Xiaohua was very puzzled. Isn't it just going out? Why does he have to keep it a secret? It's not to avoid debts. Moreover, I don't have two close friends in the villa. Who can I tell? However, Zhang Xiaohua, who was on the Kong bed, did not know that in the deep night, a figure had quietly come out of the manor's inner courtyard. She came to the edge of a forest and carefully looked around. She placed a small piece of paper in a certain spot on a tree, and then quietly left. Judging from the figure, it seemed to be a woman. The next morning, Zhang Xiaohua woke up very early. After she finished practicing her fist and sword techniques, she returned to the house to wait for He Tianshu. Not long after Zhang Xiaohua returned to the house, a small servant in green clothes and a small hat quietly came to the forest. It was the tree where the woman hid the note last night. He took the note from the tree and carefully looked at it. He slightly frowned and put it into his clothes. He also looked around before carefully leaving. Zhang Xiaohua returned to the house. Not long after, He Tianshu came to call Zhang Xiaohua with a package on his back. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua carrying a small bag in one hand and a large package in the other, he couldn't help but laugh. He said, "Why are you carrying so many things? What are they?" Zhang Xiaohua said innocently, "Don't you want to read books? Aren't these books for you?" He Tianshu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "You don't have to bring so many books. How many books can I read?" "But can I read?" Zhang Xiaohua said as she blinked. He Tianshu said helplessly, "All right, let's go." He said that he wanted to help Zhang Xiaohua carry the large package. How could Zhang Xiaohua let him carry it? Naturally, she refused. He Tianshu said, "If other people see a child like you carrying 2 packages and following me, won't they criticize me? Although they are all people I know, I can't let them laugh at me." Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment, and gave the small package in her right hand to He Tianshu. She said, "It's better to help me carry this. No one will gossip." He Tianshu helplessly took it and urged Zhang Xiaohua to quickly leave the house. The two of them took the packages and went out the door. Then, they followed the small path and walked towards the forest. Not long after, they arrived at the side of another courtyard. When they entered the courtyard, it was a very large courtyard. Right in the middle, there were 4 carriages parked. There were many people in the courtyard who were busy working. However, when Zhang Xiaohua walked into the courtyard, the first thing she saw was a large man standing in front of the first carriage. That large man was taller than the average person by a head. His body was huge and his bare arms revealed strong muscles. He stood there silently like an iron tower. The figures in the courtyard were vague, but he was like a pillar that attracted everyone's attention. Other than Zhang Xiaohua, everyone looked at him with admiration and reverence. Zhang Xiaohua also saw He Tianshu's expression. She carefully pulled on his sleeve and asked, "Who is this? Your boss?" He Tianshu flung his sleeve and said in a small voice, "Zhang Xiaohua, don't talk nonsense. This is our Misty School's #1 strongman called Shernyo. His outer martial arts are very strong. It's said that he has the strength of a few thousand pounds with one arm. He's many times stronger than you." "Oh, a few thousand pounds?" Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up. Although she wanted to approach him, she saw that the people around the carriages were far away from him. He Tianshu also didn't go over to greet him, so she didn't dare to approach him. At this time, Qiu Tong came out with some things. When she saw the big package in Zhang Xiaohua's hand, she couldn't help but feel angry and amused. She complained, "Xiaohua, you're not going to travel. Why are you carrying such a big package? Don't tell me it's the books I gave you last time. I remember that it's very heavy. Aren't you afraid that it'll crush the carriage?" Qiu Tong's voice wasn't low, so it attracted Shernyo's attention. When he saw that Zhang Xiaohua was carrying a big package in her left hand, he couldn't help but be surprised. When Zhang Xiaohua heard Qiu Tong talking about her, she replied embarrassedly, "Didn't you say that you'll be gone for a few months? I want to use this time to study. I think I can finish reading all these books, so I brought them with me." Qiu Tong and Shernyo were both surprised to hear that. Qiu Tong knew how many books she gave him last time. When she heard that he wanted to finish reading all of them in a few months, she couldn't help but be surprised. She thought to herself, even if he reads one book every 3 days, he might not be able to finish it. But if he has to read one book every 3 days, how can he completely understand it? When Shernyo heard that the package was full of books, he knew how heavy the package was. He couldn't help but be surprised. This child was very young, but he could easily pick up such a heavy package with one hand. He wasn't simple at all. Perhaps he wasn't as good as Shernyo when he was young, but there wasn't much difference. Whose disciple was this child? Qiu Tong continued, "All right, put your package in the last carriage. But you have to read carefully. There's no point in flipping through the books casually. Don't waste the manor master's good intentions." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Sister, don't worry. I know what I'm doing." After speaking, she followed He Tianshu to the last carriage. The carriage was very spacious. It was even more spacious than the ones Zhang Xiaohua had sat in before. There was actually a space similar to a bookcase. It was probably for storing things. Zhang Xiaohua opened the package and put some books on it. She put the package to one side. He Tianshu put his own package and Zhang Xiaohua's small package on the carriage, and then got down. After Zhang Xiaohua tidied up a little and got down from the carriage, there were a lot fewer people in the courtyard. They were probably ready to stop. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua felt that someone was looking at her. When she turned her head, she saw that it was Shernyo. Zhang Xiaohua nodded and smiled at him. Just as she was about to go over and talk to him, a group of people came out from the small door in the courtyard. At the front was the manor master of Huanxi Manor, Oyen. Behind Oyen was big sister Qin, who Zhang Xiaohua saw in the inner courtyard. Why did she look so special? It was because there were a few young women with good figures following behind her. They were all dressed in tight clothes and had swords at their waists. They looked valiant and formidable. Even though Zhang Xiaohua wasn't at the age of first awakening of love, she still wanted to take a few more glances at them. In such an atmosphere, how could Big Sister Qin not stand out? However, Big Sister Qin was calm. She followed Oyen down the steps. The few women behind her kept a distance from them. Their expressions were very respectful. Oyen walked in front of Shernyo and said with a smile, "Shernyo, you must have been here a long time ago." Shernyo said naively, "Manor Master, you're early." "Not too early. I've been here for an hour." Oyen continued, "Then I'll have to trouble you along the way." Shernyo said, "It's my duty. Big sect leader said that I must ensure Manor Master's safety. Otherwise, I won't be allowed to drink when I return." Oyen smiled faintly and looked around. She asked Chiao Tong, who was walking over, "Is everything ready?" Chiao Tong said in a low voice, "Yes, Mississippi. Everything is ready." Oyen nodded in satisfaction. "Then let's go. The journey is long. The sooner we leave, the sooner we can return." With that, she boarded the first carriage with Chiao Tong's help. After that, Big Sister Qin and Chiao Tong also boarded the first carriage. The remaining female disciples sat in the second carriage. Zhang Xiaohua, He Tianshu, and the rest of the people sat in the last two carriages. After everyone had boarded the carriages, Shernyo boarded the first carriage. He picked up his whip and drove the carriage out of the courtyard. The other coachman followed him. Just like that, Zhang Xiaohua's journey to the south officially began. Not long after Oyen's carriage left the manor, a few servants in green clothes and hats asked for leave and left Huanxi Manor together. When they reached Pingyang City, they went their separate ways. One of them went to the provision store. He had gone to the forest to retrieve the note in the morning. Not long after, that servant came out with the things he bought and disappeared into the crowd. Just like that, news of Oyen's journey was secretly found out by people with ulterior motives. However, no one knew what they were up to. However, all this had nothing to do with Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua sat in the carriage curiously and looked at the scenery by the roadside. Although Lu Town was in the south of Pingyang City, it was slightly to the west. Oyen's destination this time was to the east. Hence, after leaving the manor, she did not head to Pingyang City. Instead, she took a shortcut and headed to the main road in the east. It was already late autumn, and everything was withering. The crops in the fields had already been harvested, and the empty fields could be seen far away. The terrain near Pingyang City was similar to that of Lu Town. It was mostly mountainous and there were still many wild fruits and weeds on the undulating hills. From time to time, one could see villagers carrying small baskets or herding a flock of sheep. They shrunk their necks as they walked back and forth on the hills. Naturally, Zhang Xiaohua felt sad for Gu Jingji. She thought of her hometown and her parents. It had been almost a year since she last saw them. How were they doing? No book reviews, no reading. Everyone, please do a survey on the author and vote. Please vote. Please bookmark it. Thank you. Chapter 120. Shernyo steered the carriage steadily through a short path and soon entered the main road. At this time, there were not many people and carriages on the road. Shernyo drove the carriage even faster. The three carriages behind were also chasing after them. However, the driver's skills were quickly shown and the three carriages were left far behind. Shernyo did not seem to know and continued to ride at full speed. He was enjoying this long-awaited feeling. Fortunately, the attentive Chiao Tong noticed and stopped him. Shernyo said embarrassedly, "I haven't driven in a long time. It was an accident. I will drive slower next time." Shernyo slowed down, and the carriages behind finally caught up. Elder sister Qin frowned and said, "Shernyo, it's right to drive faster. However, you must ensure the safety of the village head. If you do this, won't there be no one to protect the village head?" Shernyo did not like to hear this and said, "If we meet an enemy, how can we rely on the people behind us? Won't we still have to rely on our strength?" Elder sister Qin smiled and said, "I know it's hard to talk to people like you. In this martial world, not only is there strength, there is also intelligence. You have to know that it's easy to dodge a spear in the open, but hard to defend against a stab in the dark. It's better to be careful." Shernyo was also somewhat fearful and respectful of elder sister Qin. He did not say anything else, but carefully controlled the speed of the carriage, so that the carriages behind did not have to spend much effort to catch up. After traveling for a while, they were already far away from Pingyang City. There were fewer people on the road, and more carriages. There were also many fields by the roadside, and from time to time, villages appeared in their vision. The sun was high up in the sky, shining down on the earth. It was a good day with clear skies. Shernyo seemed to be in high spirits as he drove the carriage and sang, "Sister, you take the bow. I will walk on the shore." Shernyo's voice was as loud as his body, and everyone in the 4 carriages could hear him. They could not help but look at him in a different light. They did not expect such a boorish man to be so gentle. A few of the female disciples also showed gentleness in their eyes. However, it was not long before Shernyo's tale was revealed. Shernyo only knew this one song. Along the way, from morning to night, he only sang a few lines. Sigh, even the most delicious food could not withstand eating it every day, let alone a few simple songs. At night, when it was time to find lodging, except for the stone cow, everyone had the thought of foaming at the mouth. For a long journey, the most important thing was to arrange food and lodging. Fortunately, Chiao Tong had taken this route some time ago. Before they left the manor, everyone had already discussed the route, resting, eating, and lodging. They just had to follow the plan. That night, they stayed in an inn in a small town. Although it was an inn, it was much better than the carriage house Zhang Xiaohua used to stay in. Huanqi Villa's people had booked the only small courtyard of the inn, which made the chubby boss of the inn smile so much that his eyes narrowed into slits. He was busy in front and behind of people, for fear that he would offend the rare distinguished guests. Unfortunately, when the people from the villa entered the small courtyard, 2 disciples guarded the courtyard door, preventing others from entering or leaving. Even the boss of the inn was stopped outside the door. Everyone's food was bought from the town, which made the boss, who was guarding the door, feel a bit of heartache. This was not a small amount of income. However, when he thought about it, the money they gave to stay in the inn was far beyond his expectations. He quickly dismissed the idea of complaining. Although it was already late, the people in the manor were truly capable. Not long after, they brought back a lot of things from town. The chef who followed them started the fire, and not long after, they made 2 or 3 tables of food. Zhang Xiaohua was not a manservant of the manor, but he could not eat with Oyen and the others in the main hall like He Tianshu. He could only eat a simple meal with everyone in the small room. After eating, lanterns were lit all over the small courtyard. This courtyard was not small, and there were many rooms. Zhang Xiaohua could actually stay in one room with He Tianshu. When Zhang Xiaohua was about to read by the light, He Tianshu called out to her and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, do you want to go out with me?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said, "It's already so late. Why don't you go to bed early? Why go out?" He Tianshu smiled and said, "Of course there is a reason. Do you want to go?" Zhang Xiaohua frowned and suddenly thought of Ma Jing. Could it be that Captain He also had such a hobby? Zhang Xiaohua advised, "Captain He, you've been walking for a whole day. Aren't you tired? It's better to rest early. Also, I heard that those places are not clean. It's better not to go there." He Tianshu was stunned and immediately laughed. He knocked Zhang Xiaohua's head and said, "You little child, you know quite a lot. It's said that scholars are more scheming." Sure enough, The Zhang Xiaohua before learning to read didn't know these things. Zhang Xiaohua covered her head and said with grievance, "So what if I know? It's better than you going there." He Tianshu smiled and said, "What are you thinking? I think it's still early. You should know the principle that fists don't leave your hands and music doesn't leave your mouth. Can you practice your fists today? We can go out and relax." Zhang Xiaohua finally understood He Tianshu's meaning. She was even more embarrassed and said, "It's better not to go. What time is it? I still want to go to bed early." He Tianshu said, "Zhang Xiaohua, you don't know the best time to practice. It's best to practice martial arts during the 8 hours of the meridian period. The meridian period is the time when yin and yang alternate. It's the most suitable time to practice internal energy. Although you don't know how to practice internal energy, it's still very beneficial for you to practice fist techniques. Forget it. Are you going or not?" Zhang Xiaohua hesitated and said, "Captain He, I sleep early. I don't think I've made it past the meridian period." "Alright, since I don't have time to practice at noon and at night, I'll go with you." Thus He Tianshu brought Zhang Xiaohua out. There were a few disciples standing guard outside the small courtyard. He Tianshu told them, and then left the small courtyard. Just as they left the small courtyard, they bumped into the chubby inn owner. Seeing someone come out of the small courtyard, the chubby owner greeted them with a smile. When he heard that He Tianshu wanted to find a place with a forest, he was stunned. After thinking for a long time, he pointed out the location and even wanted a waiter to lead them there. He Tianshu naturally didn't want others to follow them. He rejected the chubby owner's good intentions and brought Zhang Xiaohua out of the inn. Zhang Xiaohua didn't really remember the way. She didn't hear what the inn owner said. With Captain He leading the way, she didn't need to worry about this kind of thing. But not long after, Zhang Xiaohua felt that something was wrong. In front of her, He Tianshu would hesitate every time he walked to a street. Zhang Xiaohua suspected that He Tianshu was lost. Sure enough, after walking a few streets, He Tianshu stopped and turned around to ask Zhang Xiaohua, "Are we going the right way?" Zhang Xiaohua rolled her eyes and said, "You're the one leading the way. How would I know if it's right or not? Moreover, I'm born with a poor sense of direction. I can't remember from the medicine field to the entrance of the villa, let alone this unfamiliar place." He Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, "I see. We have to find someone to ask for directions." But it was late at night, and there were few people on the road. No one knew where He Tianshu went. It was dark, so where could they find someone to ask? He Tianshu looked around and pointed to a small lantern in front of them and said, "Let's go. We'll take a look there and find someone to ask. If it doesn't work, then we'll go back to the inn." Zhang Xiaohua naturally didn't have any objections, and followed He Tianshu to the lantern. When they walked to the light, they found that it was actually a small weapons store. It was so late yet it wasn't closed. He Tianshu also felt strange. He Tianshu walked into the store. Although it wasn't completely dark inside, there was only one oil lamp. He couldn't see clearly, but as soon as he walked into the store, he could smell the smell of alcohol. When he looked again, he saw a person dressed as a blacksmith sleeping soundly on the table. The two suddenly realized that it wasn't that the owner was diligent, but that he went to bed too early and forgot to close the door. There were a lot of swords and knives in the store. They must have been made by this blacksmith. He Tianshu didn't rush to wake up the owner. He picked up a steel knife and looked at it with interest. In fact, there was nothing strange about it. It was like a scholar who would go to a bookstore on the street to take a look. But whether they would buy books or not, it was inevitable that they would find a few books to flip through. It was the same for people who practice martial arts. When they entered a weapons store, they couldn't not take a few weapons to appreciate. This wasn't pretending to be cultured. It must be the same for people who were gay. However, when he looked at the steel knife in his hand, He Tianshu's casual expression changed a lot. He didn't expect that the small store he casually walked into would have such good quality weapons. Immediately He Tianshu began to choose seriously. He wanted to look carefully to see if there was anything better. Zhang Xiaohua was not interested in these. However, the street was very deserted. The store was better. There were snoring sounds and people's shadows. He also walked around casually. He Tianshu was a swordsman. Of course he chose a steel sword. He picked from one end of the shelf to the other end, but he didn't find anything better. When it came to the quality of the sword, there was nothing to say. It was very good. However, compared to the sword He Tianshu used, it was still a little worse. It was difficult for him to have the idea of paying for it. When he reached the end, he saw a dagger-like object at the bottom of the shelf. It was so dark that he couldn't see it clearly, so he bent down and picked it up. The dagger was cold to the touch and was quite heavy. When He Tianshu held it in front of his eyes, he saw that it wasn't an ordinary dagger. Instead of saying that it was a dagger, it was better to say that it was a small sword. Ordinary daggers had a wooden handle and a sharp blade in front, but this dagger looked the same as a sword. The hilt and the blade were one piece. They were both made of a kind of metal. However, the ratio of the blade and the hilt was not coordinated. The hilt was smaller than a common sword, but the blade was much smaller than a common sword. He Tianshu carefully touched the blade with his hand. It seemed that there was no edge. He couldn't help but frown. What is this? A child's toy? He raised his head and was about to wake the shopkeeper up when he saw Zhang Xiaohua walking around in boredom. Zhang Xiaohua turned around and looked at the sword hilt in his hand, which was one size smaller. He called out, "Zhang Xiaohua, come over here. I have something good for you." Zhang Xiaohua responded and came over. She looked at the thing that He Tianshu handed over and asked curiously, "Captain He, what is this? It looks like a toy sword. But it's much bigger than the one I played with when I was young." He Tianshu smiled and said, "It's probably something that the blacksmith made for fun. Take a look. If you like it, I'll buy it for you to play with." Zhang Xiaohua didn't take it and said, "I'm not a child. If you want to buy it, buy me a real sword." He Tianshu said, "You didn't learn any sword skills. Why buy a sword? Moreover," he suddenly stopped. He wanted to say, "Can you still use a sword with your hand?" But when he thought that this would hurt Zhang Xiaohua's heart, he quickly shut his mouth. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and asked, "Moreover, what's wrong?" He Tianshu quickly covered it up and said, "Moreover, I don't know how expensive this sword is. I'll think about it." Zhang Xiaohua made a puffed sound and turned to leave, saying, "Then I don't want this toy either." However, when he turned around, he accidentally touched a sword. Clang! The sword fell to the ground. The sound wasn't soft. The blacksmith who was sleeping suddenly raised his head and shouted, "Catch the thief!" When he saw He Tianshu holding a small sword and Zhang Xiaohua standing there, he hurriedly wiped the saliva from his mouth and walked over with a smile, saying, "Excuse me, dear guest, what have you taken a fancy to? I was just dreaming. Sorry. Zhang Xiaohua bent down and picked up the sword with her left hand. She held it in her hand and said, "If you didn't wake up, we would have taken this sword away." The blacksmith smiled and said, "Look at the two of you. How could you be that kind of person? You must be joking. You must be joking." The light in the shop was dim, but he could still see that the other people's temperament was not ordinary. This blacksmith's eyes were not ordinary. The blacksmith looked at the small sword in He Tianshu's hand and said, "Dear customer's eyes are really unique. This is our shop's treasure. It has been passed down for 100 years. Today you took a fancy to it at first glance. This one will have to bear the pain and part with it." He Tianshu smiled and used his hand to rub the dust off the small sword, saying, "This is the treatment of a shop's treasure? Why didn't you cover it with something? Moreover, what are you using this shop's treasure for? Is it a dagger? Why don't you have a blade? Is it a treasure sword? Why is it so small?" The blacksmith was speechless and said embarrassedly, "All right, then I can only tell the truth. 100 years ago, when my grandfather's grandfather was still alive, an old man with white hair and beard pawned it in our shop. He said it was an immortal's treasure. If you don't believe me, you can weigh it. How heavy is it? Would a normal metal weigh this much?" He Tianshu was still smiling, saying, "I find it strange. Why didn't he pawn it at a pawn shop? Why did he come here? Forget it. I originally wanted to buy a treasure sword, but I won't look." As he said this, he put the small sword on the shelf and prepared to leave. The blacksmith quickly stopped him, saying, "All right, dear customer, You are really amazing. I will tell you the truth. This is a toy that I found in the countryside. It looks quite heavy. I originally wanted to put it in the furnace to melt a weapon, but no matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't melt. So I just left it there. I wanted to sell it to children, but it was too heavy. Not many children would like to play with it, so I left it there for many years. Dear customer, if you take a look at other weapons and buy a lot, I will give this toy to you for free. How about it? He Tianshu curled his lips, saying, Buy a lot? I see that your shop is so remote. How much business can you have? Moreover, I am just one person. How many treasured swords can I buy? However, seeing that your craftsmanship is not bad, I will take a look first. After he finished speaking, he casually handed the small sword to Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua's left hand was holding the treasured sword, so she could only use her right hand to take it. Just as the blacksmith said, it was quite heavy. No wonder children couldn't play with it. Then, she also casually handed the treasured sword in her left hand to He Tianshu. He Tianshu took the treasured sword that Zhang Xiaohua handed over, and carefully looked at it, saying, This treasured sword is really not bad. Shopkeeper, what is the price? When the blacksmith saw that He Tianshu had taken a liking to it, he said, Customer, you really have a good eye. This is my shop's treasure. As he said this, he saw He Tianshu frown and hurriedly changed his words. Oh, I'm wrong. This is my grandfather's work, and it has been here for many years. You really have a good eye. Just based on your eye, I won't give you a lower price. He Tianshu smiled, saying, Is your grandfather Oyezi? The blacksmith was stunned, saying, No. He Tianshu said, If it is Oyezi, not to mention 20 taels, even if it is 2,000 taels, I will buy it. However, if it is not, then the price is too expensive. The blacksmith asked, Then how much does dear customer think is suitable? He Tianshu said, 2 taels is enough. The blacksmith angrily said, Are you trying to dismiss a beggar? You have no sincerity at all. After he finished speaking, he pretended to snatch the sword. He Tianshu did not make a move and let him grab the treasured sword. However, the blacksmith did not take it over and only said, If dear customer is sincere, you might as well add a little more. Zhang Xiaohua watched the two talk from the side, and felt that it was very boring. She took the small sword in her hand and looked at it in front of her eyes. Although this small sword was full of dust, it looked dark and there was a faint reflection inside. Zhang Xiaohua felt that it was very strange, and used her left hand to brush off the dust on the small sword. However, when her left hand touched the small sword, she suddenly had a strange feeling. It was as if this small sword had a connection with her left hand. But when she took her left hand away, the feeling immediately disappeared. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua transferred the small sword from her right hand to her left hand. The moment she touched it, a blood connection was born from the bottom of her heart. It was as if this small sword was her left hand. Or it could be said that a small sword grew out of her left hand. It was very strange. When Zhang Xiaohua used her right hand to brush off the dust on the sword and looked carefully, she did not find anything. It was just that the dark metal did not reflect any light. Occasionally, she could see a trace of light from the small sword's body. She did not know if it was because she saw it under the light. However, no matter what this small sword was, whether it was a toy or a dagger, Zhang Xiaohua decided that she must have it. At this time, the blacksmith and He Tianshu's confrontation had basically ended. He Tianshu said, How about this, let's not talk anymore. Let's each take a step back. 7 taels of silver. Chapter 121. The blacksmith seemed to have found an organization and his face was full of joy as he said, Good brother, since you're so straightforward, I can't bear to part with my treasure. I'll be friends with you. 7 taels it is, 7 taels it is. In the future, you must visit my store more often. He Tianshu smiled and said, Of course, I still have a group of brothers. If I take it back and they like it, I'll definitely pull them over. However, when the time comes, boss must give me a discount. The blacksmith also smiled and said, No problem. The first time it's unfamiliar, the second time it's familiar. If you become a regular customer, There will naturally be benefits. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua pulled on the corner of He Tianshu's clothes. He Tianshu looked back at the small sword in Zhang Xiaohua's hand and said to the blacksmith, "This small sword, my little brother likes it. Why don't you let him pick it up and play with it?" The blacksmith didn't mind. He waved his hand and said, "No problem. Didn't I just say that this toy is a gift from me to the little brother? Just bring a few more people to patronize another day." Everyone was happy. He Tianshu paid the money and asked for the way back to the inn. Only then did he leave the weapons store with Zhang Xiaohua. Along the way, He Tianshu was very happy. At such a cheap price, he found a very good treasure sword. It was much better than going to the forest to practice martial arts. It seemed that in the future, it would be better to come out more often. Zhang Xiaohua was also very happy. She held the small sword in her left hand and kept waving it around as if her arm had suddenly grown. However, she didn't notice that at this time it was indeed too late. There was no one on the street. As she walked, Zhang Xiaohua felt sleepy and couldn't help but close her eyes. She softly laid on the ground and tightly held the small sword in her hand. He Tianshu was even more amused. Along the way, he lovingly looked at his treasure sword. After walking for a while, he found that Zhang Xiaohua's footsteps were gone. When he looked back, he couldn't find her figure. He Tianshu couldn't help but feel anxious. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Where did this expert come from? He didn't even notice it. Could it be one of the top experts in Jianghu? When He Tianshu arrived with his sword in hand, he saw Zhang Xiaohua lying motionless on the ground from afar. He became even more nervous and cautious. Seeing that there was no movement in the surroundings, he took a few steps forward and felt a little bitter. This child was fine just a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, he had fallen into such a state. How was he going to explain this to his brother? When he arrived in front of him, he carefully examined him, but did not find any injuries on his body. He could not help but think, could this be the legendary acupoint strike? Did someone hit his Achilles heel? In the midst of his nervousness, a very familiar sound suddenly came from Zhang Xiaohua's nose. It was okay to practice boxing and swordsmanship, but how could Zhang Xiaohua let others see his boxing skills behind closed doors? Therefore, he still left the small yard. The inn was located at the end of a street, next to a small river and a small bridge. Zhang Xiaohua walked to the river and looked along the river. Just behind the inn was a pond. Opposite the pond was just like Zhang Xiaohua's home in the Guozhuang house. There was a small bamboo forest. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up, and he walked towards the bamboo forest. Sure enough, as Zhang Xiaohua thought, there was an empty space in the bamboo forest. Moreover, there was no one here. Zhang Xiaohua got into a fighting stance and practiced the Big Dipper magical fist 9 times. He let the thicker and thicker flow throughout his body before he stopped. Following that, Zhang Xiaohua carefully looked around to make sure there was no one around. Only then did he use the small sword and perform the 16 sword moves. He didn't know if it was because he changed the tree branch or because he was in a good mood, but these few sword moves were very smooth. The nameless warm flow happily flowed from his shoulder to Zhang Xiaohua's left hand. In the past, the warm flow would disappear when it reached his left hand, but it didn't disappear now. All of it flowed into the small sword in Zhang Xiaohua's hand. That small sword, under Zhang Xiaohua's brandishing, actually gradually emitted a black light, but it was very thin and not noticeable. At the end of Zhang Xiaohua's practice, the sword moves were very exciting. Just like that night at the mountain villa, he changed the moves and stabbed towards the bamboo that was as thick as a small bowl in front of him. In fact, Zhang Xiaohua thought that he could use the tree branch to pierce a small hole in the big tree. Although the bamboo was hollow, its surface was much harder than the big tree. Even if he changed the tree branch, with the small sword stick-like tip, he would only be able to pierce a small hole in the bamboo. However, the result was greatly out of Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. When the blunt tip of the sword pierced the hard bamboo, the bamboo's outer shell was like paper. The small sword pierced through the bamboo without any hindrance and came out from the other side. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. He quickly withdrew the small sword and looked at the bamboo in disbelief. However, the hole in the bamboo was still there, so he couldn't doubt it. Thus, he went up again and carefully touched the bamboo until he confirmed that there was nothing wrong with the bamboo and that it was very hard. Only then did he look at his left hand and the small sword in it. Since when did he become so powerful? Elder Yu used a long sword to pierce through a big tree was very powerful, but he could actually use this stick-like small sword to pierce through the hard bamboo. Although it was not as good as Elder Yu's, it was far, far better than others. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to think about this. After all, he had never seen others practice the sword and didn't know the power of other swords. At least, he knew that he had far exceeded his expectations. At this time, there was already a commotion by the bamboo forest. Zhang Xiaohua quickly came out of the bamboo forest. This wasn't the mountain villa. Looking at the time, maybe the people in the mountain villa had already packed up and were preparing to leave. When Zhang Xiaohua quickly ran back to the inn, most of the people had already eaten breakfast and were packing up. He Tianchu was also standing there with a frown. When he saw Zhang Xiaohua come in, his frown loosened and he asked with some anger, "Zhang Xiaohua, where did you run off to so early in the morning? Why did you let everyone wait for you?" Zhang Xiaohua quickly apologized and said, "Captain He, didn't you say yesterday that you can't leave your mouth in your fists? I went out early in the morning to practice my fists." He Tianchu looked at the small sword in his hand and found it funny in his heart. He knew that he had a child's temperament, and that he would definitely play with this toy. So he seriously said, "Practicing your fists is a good thing, but it also depends on the occasion. We are outside, so we must be careful and don't cause any trouble. It's better to keep this toy close to your chest. Don't hold it in your hand every day and make others laugh at you. Alright, let's go eat." The village head has already finished eating and is preparing to leave. Zhang Xiaohua put the small sword into his chest and hurriedly ate his breakfast. He simply packed up his things and boarded the carriage. The 4 carriages gradually went further and further away. The fat boss was still standing there, reluctant to part. What a good guest. He only stayed for one night and did not eat the inn's food, but he was actually given so much money. If he had such a guest every day, it would be hard for him not to become rich. Originally, the fat boss thought that he would keep this beautiful memory in his heart and slowly savor it in the future. But before noon, a man in embroidered clothes riding a handsome horse came to the inn to inquire about the whereabouts of yesterday's group of people. His face was full of temptation, and the fat boss couldn't help but recall yesterday's beautiful time in full detail. When the brocade-clothed man left in satisfaction, the fat boss once again sighed in admiration. What a good customer. Even after the man had left, he could still bring him fortune. He really had to thank the spirits of his ancestors. The people of Huanxi Mountain Villa naturally didn't know about this, and were still hurrying on their way. However, today wasn't as fresh as yesterday. Even Zhang Xiaohua, who didn't go out much, didn't really enjoy the scenery outside. It was only a day's journey away from Pingyang City. The scenery and culture along the way were really not much different from the place where she lived. After seeing so much, of course, she would get tired of it. Moreover, Shernyo's voice was really good. From yesterday to today, it was still very loud and clear. Those few lines of the lyrics always lingered in their ears. It must be that he drank a lot of wine in the inn last night, and his throat was well nourished. Therefore, a few disciples secretly muttered that when they stayed the night again, they must reduce the amount of wine Shernyo drank, so that his voice would become hoarse. His singing was good, but if they kept hearing these few lines, how could they live in the future? Zhang Xiaohua and He Tianchu sat in the 3rd carriage. There were a few disciples beside them, and they were chatting about something. However, Zhang Xiaohua didn't mind. His left hand was playing with the small sword and his right hand was holding a book, reading it with great interest. Zhang Xiaohua's right hand hadn't fully recovered. From the outside, it looked the same as when he first returned to the villa. However, Zhang Xiaohua knew very well that his right hand wasn't like what Elder Yu said. His bones and meridians weren't destroyed by his inner energy, and couldn't return to normal. He could feel that his hand was recovering at a perceptible speed. Moreover, he often tried to use his right hand now. He believed that one day, he would give everyone an unexpected surprise. He Tianchu sat in the innermost part of the carriage, resting with his eyes closed. He was also holding a book in his hand. He seemed to be thinking about something. After a while, a smile appeared on his face and he opened his eyes. He raised his eyes to look at the scenery outside the window and frowned. Although there was some distance between them and the stone cow, the singing voice traveled quite far, and he could hear it clearly. When his gaze landed on Zhang Xiaohua, he couldn't help but smile. He looked at the small sword in Zhang Xiaohua's left hand and said with a smile, "Zhang Xiaohua, this toy isn't bad, right? It seems like you like it very much." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he put down his book and looked at the small sword in his hand. He said sincerely, "Yes, Captain He. I really like this small sword. Thank you for giving it to me." He Tianshu waved his hand and said, "Actually, I didn't spend a single silver. It's just a gift. I don't need it so naturally. I'm giving it to you to play with. Luckily, this toy doesn't have a blade, so I'm not afraid of hurting you." Zhang Xiaohua said, "Didn't you still buy a treasured sword? I see that you already have one in your hand. Why do you still want to buy another one?" He Tianshu smiled and said, "My original sword isn't some famous weapon. It's just a low-value and consumable item. I have to change it every once in a while. I saw that the steel sword in the shop is pretty good. It's worth at least 15 taels of silver in Pingyang City. I bought it for 7 taels of silver. Of course it's worth it. Moreover, the owner of the shop even gave me a buy one get one free. Although it's a toy, it still makes me very happy. So you don't have to specially thank me." What he didn't know was that in the small town far away, the blacksmith arrogantly came to the pork shop. He generously threw a few silver taels to the butcher and called out, "Laolu, I'll return you the money from a few days ago. Also give me some offal. Hurry up, I still have to go to the wine shop to buy some wine." The butcher said in surprise, "Old Tai, why are you so generous today? Did you open a shop?" The blacksmith said proudly, "Yesterday, a big head came out of nowhere and actually bought a steel sword for 7 taels of silver. Don't you think I'm lucky?" The butcher smacked his tongue and said, "What a spendthrift. Usually no one would buy your steel sword for 2 or 3 taels of silver. You actually managed to get such a good price." As he said that, he didn't delay and quickly prepared food for the blacksmith. Then the blacksmith seemed to have thought of something and said, "Oh right, the toy that your mistress picked up on the mountain 2 years ago. Yesterday, I gave it to that person. I told you that if you could sell it, I would give you money. However, I gave you a buy one get one free deal. Let's just take it as 5 copper coins." The butcher said unhappily, "That customer must have bought your steel sword at such a high price because you gave it to him. How can he just give me 5 copper coins to dismiss me?" The blacksmith angrily said, "The toy that your mistress picked up was left in my shop for 3 years and no one paid attention to it. If you don't want these 5 copper coins, I will chase after that customer and get it back." The butcher smiled apologetically and said, "Then 5 copper coins is too little. No matter what, you have to add a little more." The blacksmith laughed and scolded, "I knew that you had such thoughts. I'll give you 15 copper coins. It can be considered as not letting your mistress down." After saying that, he took out a handful of copper coins from his bosom and placed them on the meat table. The butcher used lightning speed to put away the copper coins and said with a smile, "Since it was all picked up, this money is also free. When your mistress picks up something again, she will let you sell it." The blacksmith repeatedly waved his hand and said, "Don't, let's go to a pawn shop. That toy has been in my shop for 3 years. I don't want to get involved in this kind of business. Hurry up and get me into the water. I still have wine to sell. Today's weather is good. It's a good day to get drunk." The blacksmith took the meat and hurriedly left. The butcher also carried on with his business. As for Zhang Xiaohua, she did not know that the small sword that she loved so much was only worth 15 copper coins. He didn't say that I would suddenly fall asleep. Also, I have never gone out so late. He Tianshu frowned and said, "This is a problem. I don't know if you fall asleep at midnight every day. Otherwise, it will be troublesome." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "How troublesome?" He Tianshu explained, Midnight is the time when yin and yang are alternating. Many inner strength cultivation methods require you to cultivate at midnight. If you are like this, how can you cultivate these inner strength cultivation methods? Zhang Xiaohua said somewhat anxiously. Then what do I do? He Tianqiu smiled and said, there is no need to be so anxious. There are many inner strength cultivation methods that do not require you to cultivate at that time. We'll talk about it again when you find the opportunity to cultivate your inner force. Zhang Xiaohua thought about it and did not ask any more. Chapter 122. The days on the road were extremely boring. However, Zhang Xiaohua didn't have high requirements. She had books to read every day, so she didn't care whether she was in the carriage or in her own room. On the contrary, she didn't have to work in the fields, so she had more time to study. The carriage traveled for another 10 days. During this time, the stone cow's singing didn't stop. At first, everyone admired it, but later they hated it. In the end, they couldn't bear it anymore. Finally, Manor Lord O took action. Under the Manor Lord's obstruction, the stone cow stopped singing for half a day. However, when it was almost evening, the stone cow couldn't hold back and started singing again when it saw the splendid sunset. Oyen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She could only let Aunt Qin talk to her to relieve her boredom. As for the people behind, they slightly distanced themselves from the stone cow. After listening for a long time, they turned a blind eye to it. They just treated it as a giant human-shaped crow making noise. In the first few days, Zhang Xiaohua would drag He Tianqiu out to find a place to practice martial arts every night. However, He Tianqiu seemed to have learned his lesson from the first day, and always refused. Zhang Xiaohua could only go out to practice martial arts by herself. After a few days, she felt strange and secretly asked He Tianqiu the reason. He Tianqiu smiled and asked Zhang Xiaohua if she saw the other disciples go out to practice martial arts or practice in the yard. Zhang Xiaohua thought about it carefully. She really hadn't seen them practice martial arts. Only then did He Tianqiu tell her the reason. It turned out that He Tianqiu was the same as the other disciples. They all practiced internal strength. Those who practiced martial arts knew that they trained their muscles, bones, and skin externally and their qi internally. Most of the internal strength practice was to meditate, gather qi, and circulate the internal strength. In fact, practicing martial arts was to exercise the muscles and bones. Just like Nie Xiao, and the others in Huanxi Manor, they also practiced internal strength at night. Practicing martial arts in the morning and evening was to exercise the muscles and bones, and also to familiarize themselves with the martial arts. Since they were far away and had no place to exercise, they could naturally cancel the practice of martial arts and focus on practicing internal strength. Moreover, according to He Tianqiu, when the internal strength practice reached a certain level, it could replace sleep at night. They just needed to meditate for a few hours at night. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua felt a burst of admiration. If she didn't need to sleep by meditating, how interesting would that be? However, when she thought about her habit of sleeping at night and not being able to wake her up, she couldn't help but feel depressed. The disciples of the Misty School didn't need to practice martial arts early or late, but Zhang Xiaohua couldn't. He didn't know any internal strength, and could only find a place to practice martial arts. Moreover, he was afraid of being seen by others. Every time he arrived at a place, the first thing he did after dinner was to find a slightly hidden place to practice his martial arts. And ever since Zhang Xiaohua got the toy sword, his swordsmanship improved. He knew the 16 changes in his mind, and as soon as he thought about it, he could use them at will. Moreover, the angle and speed of his swordsmanship became faster and faster. The small sword was as nimble as his own arm, and the warm current was much thicker. The power also exceeded Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. Ever since one time when he practiced his swordsmanship in the suburbs, Zhang Xiaohua didn't use his full strength to stab anything. He was afraid that if he knocked down the tree, people would ask him for compensation. However, Zhang Xiaohua's worries quickly disappeared. The road to the south wasn't all official roads. After a few days, they started to take some dirt roads and mountain paths. Moreover, they didn't always stay at the town's inns at night. Sometimes, they set up their own tents and slept in the wild. On this day, Shernyo was the first to drive the carriage. The group of people arrived at a mountain. The mountain was not very high, but there was only a small path for the carriage to move forward. It meandered around the mountain. There were many shrubs and dried-up trees on the mountain. At a glance, nothing could be seen clearly. Shernyo drove the carriage to a stop. He turned around and asked, "Miss Chiotong, how did you get here last time? This mountain is very dangerous. If there's an ambush, we'll definitely be at a disadvantage." Chiotong looked at the mountain and frowned. "Last time we passed through the mountain, there wasn't any danger. It seems that there's a path from the foot of the mountain. However, it's a long detour. I asked the guide before, and he said that it would take an extra day. Last time, I was in a hurry, so I didn't take the detour." Aunt Chin thought for a moment, then said, "This time the village lord is in the carriage. It's better not to take any risks. Look at the mountain. If there's a big rock falling down, no matter how high your martial arts are, it's useless. It's better to take a detour." Oyen didn't quite agree. She felt that it wasn't worth it to take a detour for safety. However, Aunt Chin said, "It's only an extra day's journey. It's not a matter of days to reach Rejuvenation Valley. Also, your seed won't germinate in winter. Why should we take a risk for an insignificant day?" Everyone in the carriage agreed. Fortunately, Oyen was also a person who readily accepted good advice. She didn't stubbornly insist on her views. Seeing that everyone was persuading her, she also agreed to take a detour. When the carriage had gone far along the small path in front of the mountain, several men in black appeared from the forest. Looking at the carriage that was getting further and further away, they made a hand signal. Then they all used their qinggong and leaped up the mountain. The people in the carriage didn't know that they had avoided a disaster because of their caution. They continued to move forward. The next day, they went around the mountain and re-entered the planned route. The following journey was still not on the official road. They continued to pass through the mountains and forests. However, it wasn't as dangerous as this time. However, Shernyo, Aunt Chin, and the other disciples were extremely careful, afraid that something unexpected would happen. However, the heavens didn't let them. On this day, they were in front of a forest. Although there was a saying in the Jianghu, "Don't enter a forest." Looking at the forest in front of them, there weren't many trees. Most of the leaves had fallen off. The cold wind blew, making a whistling sound. It didn't seem to be dangerous, so everyone let down their guard. Just as Shernyo was singing a ballad and driving the carriage into the forest, a sound was heard. A whistling arrow was shot out from the forest and nailed to the ground about 10 zhang in front of the carriage. The sudden arrow interrupted Shernyo's song. He immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. With a "U" sound, he forcefully pulled on the horse's reins and stopped the carriage. Everyone in the carriage was chatting, so they all stopped talking. Even Zhang Xiaohua and the others in the carriage behind them were startled by this sudden situation. Many disciples were also stunned. They immediately took out their weapons and jumped out of the carriage, preparing to fight. Just as everyone was feeling nervous, a man came out of the forest on a horse. He was tall and was dressed very simply. He held a spear in his hand. The horse he sat on was not very handsome. It was only moving forward slowly with a dee-da-dee-dee sound. When he got closer, everyone could see clearly that the man had a square face. His face was thin, but his eyes were very lively. His eyes were staring at the 4 carriages that were spinning around. When he reached the whistling arrow, he stopped and held the spear with both hands. Everyone was shocked and thought, could it be that this person came to challenge us alone? They couldn't help but tighten their grip on their weapons. However, after a while, they still didn't see that person urging his horse. Just as they were puzzled, they heard that person shout. His voice was even louder than Shernyo's. He shouted, "This mountain was opened by me. These trees were planted by me. If you want to pass by, you have to pay the toll." His voice was extremely loud and clear. It was so loud that some birds in the forest flew away. However, the people in the carriages looked at this person and laughed in their hearts. It was as if they were watching a joke. They didn't answer. When that person saw that the other party didn't respond to his shout, and that the driver of the carriage didn't have any expression on his face. He coldly stared at him. He couldn't help but become angry. What are you looking at? Were you the one who sang just now? What kind of nonsense are you spouting? You are dirtying my ears for no reason at all. Hurry up and hand over the money, and I'll let you pass. Otherwise. At this point, the spear in his hand swayed in the air threateningly. The stone ox wanted to see what kind of skills this robber had, but when he heard him say that his singing was bad, it was simply exposing his reverse scale. The stone ox was furious. He jumped down from the carriage and walked toward the robber with his bare hands. The robber saw the coachman jump down from the carriage and walk toward him. He was stunned. When the stone ox got closer, he raised his spear and pulled the reins of his horse. Everyone in Huanxi Manor thought that he was going to drive his horse forward and stab Shernyo with his spear. Although everyone knew that Shernyo's external martial arts were at the peak of perfection, they were still worried for him when he faced a spear with his bare hands. However, that person pulled the reins. He didn't rush forward. Instead, he turned his horse and drove it back. Not only Shernyo, but the crowd was also in an uproar. What was he doing? While everyone was in a daze, that person returned to the forest and disappeared in a flash. Stone Ox frowned. Just as he was about to turn around, he heard the sound of a gong in the forest. 4 large horses rushed out from the forest. Behind the horses were a dozen or so men wielding weapons. They followed the horses as they galloped out. The people on the horses stopped in front of the stone cow. There were 4 people in a row. Other than the weak-looking scholar at the side, the other 3 were burly men. They were dressed in martial attire, and each of them held a sword in their hands. They stood on the horses and did not speak. The scholar urged his horse forward and said, "Where did you come from? You actually have guts. You can still keep calm in front of Nyo Air. You must also be a martial artist." Shernyo frowned and said, "Why do you care where I come from? If you know what's good for you, quickly get out of the way and let us pass. Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite." The scholar hadn't laughed yet. The group of strong men who surrounded them first roared with laughter. It seemed that they had never seen such an arrogant robber. The scholar said again, "This brother, I see that you are tall and have an imposing appearance. You must be a martial artist and have some unique skills. But didn't you see the opponents in front of you? These are the 3 leaders of our families, and there are more than 10 brothers. Even if you have strong martial arts skills and a body made of steel, how many nails can you twist? Why don't you leave the gold and silver early? Everyone will have a face and it will be easier to meet in the future." Shernyo laughed out loud and said, "Your grandpa sure has always been the one to rob other people's masters. It's not other people's turn to be noisy in front of me. If you provoke me, I will directly break into your nest and take your gold and silver." At this time, the man on the horse frowned and said, "Military advisor, why are you being long-winded with him? We will swarm him. Why are we afraid of his martial arts? Let's rob the carriage first. If there is money, we will rob. If there is a woman, we will rob. Isn't it fun?" The people of Huanxi Mountain Manor originally had some people outside the carriage, and some people inside. They were all watching the fun. When they heard the leader's words, they felt that it was insulting the manor lord and the others. They couldn't help but be angry. They all took their weapons and jumped off the carriage. Except for a few female disciples guarding around the carriage, everyone else lined up behind Shernyo. He Tianshu whispered to Zhang Xiaohua. He also took out his long sword and guarded beside Oyan's carriage. Zhang Xiaohua didn't get off the carriage. She went to the front of the carriage and sat with the disciple driving the carriage. She watched the scene with interest. When the military advisor saw the military advisor change his expression, he changed his expression and changed his expression. Then he said to the leader with a smile, "Don't be angry. The Jianghu today is not the same as before. The barbaric killing has passed. Now we talk about gentleness and using martial arts to convince people. Although we rob the poor and give to the rich, we have to follow the trend of the times and keep pace with the times. Otherwise, we will be ridiculed by our peers. As the ancient people said, it is better to lose 10 taels of silver than to lose an inch of face. Even if we can't win this time, we have to be ambitious, thoughtful, and ambitious strong men." One of the leaders at the side spat and said, I used to rob as much as I wanted, but what happened to me now? You still want to talk about gentleness? Do you want to see others talk to you? You all have weapons. Why don't you do it? The leader said, Second brother, don't be impatient. Now we talk about group and scale. If we don't have a reputation, who will come to join us? If we don't do it ourselves, won't we be swallowed by others in the end? I think what the military advisor said is reasonable. If we can't convince people with martial arts, it's not too late for us to do it. Either way, we will use weapons. It's a different soup but not the same medicine. The strong men's words were not hidden from the people of Huanxi Mountain Villa. Everyone was stunned and didn't know what to do. Were they robbers or preachers? At this time, the military advisor urged the horse forward and shouted to the stone ox, Brother, as you can see, we are not unscrupulous people, but we have to do the duty of enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. We have to do this. We can negotiate and let you go after you take the gold and silver. Look at your attitude, you don't seem to be happy. Fortunately, you're lucky to have met us. I'm not that talented, but I've just returned from overseas last year. I've learned a new type of robbery from overseas, and I want to show my ambition here. Since you've come to my territory, I'm the one who makes the decision. If you pass, our leader is a gentleman and will definitely let you pass. But if you lose, don't blame us for being rude. Leave behind the gold, silver, and beauties. What do you think? Everyone understood what he said, but they didn't know how to answer. Usually when they encountered robbers, they just fought with their weapons. Now this overseas returnee was talking about rules, which made everyone feel uneasy. At this time, Oyen, who didn't show up in the carriage, stretched out her hand and waved to a female disciple outside the carriage. The disciple looked over, and after Oyen said a few words, the female disciple walked to the stone ox and whispered in his ear. The stone ox frowned and said to the group of experts, Fine, my master said to let you come. We'll take you all. Let's see if you're sent out by the government or if you're smuggled out. The military advisor was overjoyed and said, That's good. Let's fight peacefully. Don't shed blood. Alas, there are still some people in Jianghu who want to see blood. It's not good. Even if they can't hurt people, it's not good to hurt flowers and plants. It's inevitable to destroy the ecological environment. Oh, let's not talk too much. We have our own rules in our territory. Do you see the 3 heroes in front of you? These are the 3 tests. If 3 of you fight against 3 of our leaders, you will pass if you win 2 rounds. If you lose 2 rounds, you will have to leave behind 4 carriages and a group of women. What do you think? When the people in the villa heard this, they all slapped their foreheads. Oh my God, after talking for so long, wasn't it just 3 battles? Luckily, they were overseas returnees. If they weren't smuggled out, then they must be from some random sect. They were so long-winded. However, to be able to rob people to such a level, it was amazing. Of course, the stone ox didn't dare to agree casually. He quickly walked to the front of the carriage. Oyen glanced at him. This strong man knew how to calculate. Including He Tianshu, there were 3 people. Even if there was one more, it wouldn't be easy to get together. However, the stone ox didn't want to. He said, Villa Lord, I can handle this group of brats alone. Why do we have to go through so much trouble? Aunt Chin smiled and said, We've been out for so long and feel so bored. We only know how to travel all day. Now that there's a ready-made fun of us, why don't we enjoy it? I haven't seen such interesting bandits in so many years. The stone ox was originally an unromantic person. Hearing the villa lord and Aunt Chin's words, he couldn't be bothered with them. He returned to the front and said, All right, my master agrees. However, we still have a question. What if we win? What will you do? The military advisor smiled embarrassedly and said, We didn't think about that. But I'm the master of my territory. I set the rules. If you win, I'll let you pass through my territory. That should be fine, right? The stone ox was too lazy to say more. He waved his hand and said, 3 battles at the same time or 1 at a time? The military advisor rolled his eyes and said, Naturally, it's better to start at the same time. Time is money. The earlier you finish, the earlier you can rest. That way you can go earlier. What do you think? The stone ox was about to agree when a voice like an oriole came from the carriage. That's not right. When the strong men heard this, their eyes couldn't help but light up. They stared at the carriage, waiting for the beautiful woman to appear. Unfortunately, when Aunt Jean appeared, everyone's heads drooped. They were filled with endless melancholy. Her voice was so beautiful, but why was she so ordinary? Aunt Jean stood at the front of the carriage and said, "If all 3 battles are held at the same time, won't they be split into 3 places? If your subordinates don't keep their promise and attack together, won't our carriage be in danger? We suggest that we compete one at a time." This chapter was written very reluctantly. It was written very slowly. It stuck. Please collect it. Thank you. Chapter 123. The strategist didn't seem embarrassed at having his scheme exposed. He only shook his head and said, "Sai, you really can't talk to a summer bug. Time is so precious and you guys are wasting it. You even look down on our character. You're looking down on the new generation of mountain kings. Forget it. Since you came from afar to deliver supplies, we'll just put up with it. We'll listen to you this time." Afterwards, Zhoma came to the head commander's side and whispered in his ear for a while. The head commander nodded. Only then did the military advisor speak again. "Since it's decided, who will you send for the first round? Is it this big guy?" The stone ox glared angrily and raised its head to walk forward. However, it was stopped by Aunt Jean. The stone ox walked back to the carriage in confusion. Oyen said, "Stone ox, don't be angry. We're just having fun. Is there anyone among the mountain bandits who can beat you and Aunt Jean? However, I'm afraid they'll use tricks. It's better to let He Tianshu go first." The stone ox was startled. "He Tianshu? Can he do it?" Aunt Jean smiled. Although He Tianshu isn't a high-ranking disciple, he's still a team leader. He's much stronger than the other disciples. He's just right to go. There aren't many in this wilderness who can beat him. Even if he loses, we don't have to worry. Don't we still have you? Let's see if these 3 people are your match. The stone ox didn't have many ideas in this regard. You guys are the ones making the decisions. If you say it's okay, then it's okay. Afterwards, Aunt Jean called He Tianshu to the front of the carriage and also gave him some instructions. He Tianshu was somewhat prepared to let himself go. Among all the people in the manor, he was now ranked 3rd. His little vanity was temporarily satisfied. When He Tianshu came to the front of the formation, he said to the strategist on the horse, "My surname is He. I'm here to ask for advice. Who will dismount?" The strategist looked He Tianshu up and down and smiled. "This person in front of us has an imposing appearance. He must be an expert. We'll treat him seriously. Please wait a moment." Then he cupped his hands to the person beside him and said, "Second leader, please show them your strength." The second leader didn't say anything. He took out his sword and got off the horse. He walked in front of He Tianshu and took up a stance. "Please." He Tianshu saw that they were ready to fight and didn't hold back. He formed a sword sign and thrust it into the opponent's stance. Thus the 2 of them exchanged moves. Although He Tianshu was very cautious when he attacked, he was actually somewhat contemptuous in his heart. As a disciple of the ethereal sect, he had always been a proud person. Although he was not a core disciple of the sect, he had always been very confident, and did not think that this robber would be a match for him. However, after a few moves, he discovered that the man was not as weak as he had imagined. The man's attack and defense were good, and he was able to fight with ease. He Tianshu could not help but immediately restrain his thoughts and treat the man seriously. His sword moves were shwa-shwa, one move after another, and he attacked the second head nonstop. When the second head saw the changes in He Tianshu's moves, he also revealed a smile at the corner of his mouth. He actually used offense as defense, and He Tianshu did not have the slightest advantage. The people of Huanxi Manor were in the same mood as He Tianshu at first. But when they saw that He Tianshu didn't gain the upper hand, they were shocked. When they carefully looked at the man's sword skills, they were even more surprised. Oyen frowned and said to Aunt Jean, "Aunt Jean, when did such an expert appear in the wilderness? Could it be that in a few days, the martial arts in Jianghu have improved so much? Our Misty School's disciples can't even take down a robber. Did the sun rise from the west? Aunt Qin was also confused and said, Manor Lord is wise. It's really like this. Looking at the situation, this man isn't any weaker than He Tianshu. How can someone with such skills become a bandit? It's really strange. The layman watched the show while the expert watched the skill. Everyone was worried, but only Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. Why? Ever since He Tianshu started fighting with the man, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't stop muttering in her heart. What's this Captain He doing? Why is he playing with him? Didn't he use the third variation of the sword move that Elder Yu taught him? Didn't he just stab him from the side? There's also this move. He already swung his sword forward and used the 10th variation of the sword move. Didn't he just stab into the man's chest and injure him with one strike? Damn, there's also this move. Using the first variation is so simple. Amen, I think Captain He is just playing with him. Actually, Zhang Xiaohua was only an armchair strategist. She only knew what to do after watching from the side. If she really went up to meet the enemy, she wouldn't know what to do when the other party swung his sword, let alone think of a move. Moreover, the onlooker saw more clearly. Being in the middle of a battle, one's life was always in danger. How would one have the time to observe other people's thoughts? Of course, Zhang Xiaohua could see this. More importantly, the variation of the sword move that Elder Yu taught her was indeed a top-notch move. It was something that the other party used to protect his life. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was cursing in her heart, there was a new change in the battle. He Tianshu couldn't help but feel annoyed when he saw that he couldn't win after attacking for a long time. His face seemed to be a little noisy. He moved his body and displayed another secret sword move from the Misty School. The moment he used this move, the second in charge couldn't help but feel a little pressured. He blocked left and right, and actually retreated step by step. However, after retreating for a while, he changed his sword move and changed his style. He changed his sword move and moved around like He Tianshu at the beginning. The momentum of his sword move was also a little strange. Not long after, he regained control of the situation. The two of them fought like this for a long time, but there was still no winner. The people in Huanxi Manor were a little relieved. Only Oyen and Aunt Qin were puzzled. They didn't know who the thief was. At this time, the military advisor at the side said, "Stop, stop." When the second in charge heard this, he used his padao to knock He Tianshu's sword. Then he moved out of the circle and silently looked at the military advisor. He Tianshu saw that the second in charge left and didn't chase after him. He only took a defensive stance and carefully took precautions. He was afraid of any tricks. That military counselor loudly said, "This brother's martial art skill is actually so high that he is able to be on par with our second master. This is really unexpected. However, the two of you are evenly matched. If you continue to fight, it will inevitably take a lot of time. Why don't we call this a draw?" He Tianshu didn't understand and turned to look at Aunt Qin. Aunt Qin was at the side and naturally saw it clearly. That person was indeed not inferior to He Tianshu. Suggesting a draw was beneficial to her. Thus, she also said loudly, "All right, the military advisor is a straightforward person. Then it's settled. After a short rest, we will prepare for the second round." He Tianshu put away his sword and walked back to the carriage. The second in charge also got on his horse and returned to their side. Aunt Qin waited for He Tianshu to come closer and quietly asked, "Captain He, what do you think of the opponent's skills?" He Tianshu blushed slightly and said, "This person is very strong. After fighting with me for so long, he still looked like he wanted to continue. Perhaps he still has some tricks up his sleeve. Where did this expert come from? It's really hard to understand. Hall Master Qin, this one has let everyone down and didn't win this round. I am ashamed." Aunt Qin smiled and said, "Captain He, you don't need to mind. This is just a pastime. It's good that you came back without any mishap. There is always a mountain higher than the one before. There will always be experts in Jianghu. Captain He, you don't need to belittle yourself." After a while, the military advisor shouted again, "On the other side, have you finished your discussion? How about we start the second round now?" Aunt Chin looked at the stone ox and said, "Are you going up or should I?" Before the stone ox could reply, Oyen said from the side, "Stone ox, you go up. Aunt Chin doesn't like to gamble in front of others. If you win, we will have victory in our hands. At worst, it will be a draw. We will give up on the third round and see what these experts plan to do." The stone ox nodded and steadily walked forward. The military advisor looked at the stone ox and smiled quietly. He said to the first in charge, "First in charge, it's up to you now. Let them see your heroic fighting style." The first in charge chuckled and also dismounted from his horse. He held his sword and walked towards the stone ox. When he got close, although the first in charge wasn't short, he was still half a head shorter than the stone ox. He slightly raised his head and looked at the stone ox's silent eyes. He smiled and said, "This brother, what is your name? Can you let me know?" The stone ox shook his head and didn't say anything. The first in charge didn't force him and said, "Then this brother, please make your move. You don't need a weapon?" When the stone ox heard this, he still shook his head and said, "My fist is a weapon. You just have to be careful." The first in charge narrowed his eyes and said, "If that's the case, then I won't be polite." When he finished speaking, he held his sword and chopped down. The stone ox saw the ferocious power of the sword and wasn't afraid. He slightly tilted his body and dodged the blade. He punched the back of the sword. How could the first in charge let him have his way? He twisted his wrist and changed his stance. The blade sliced towards the stone ox's wrist. Although the stone ox was careless, it didn't mean he was stupid. Although his mighty King Kong hand wasn't afraid of weapons, who knew if his opponent's sword was a rare divine weapon? If he was injured because of carelessness, then he wouldn't be able to live up to his decades of experience. The stone ox quickly changed his stance and dodged the blade. He sent a palm towards the first in charge's chest. The first in charge couldn't dodge in time. He clenched his left hand and punched towards the stone ox's palm. Thus, after a few rounds, the two people's fists and palms collided. It was a simple collision of fists and palms, but the result was out of everyone's expectations. The first in charge's fist hit the stone ox's palm. Just like Zhang Xiaohua and Yu Dei that day, the stone ox flew out diagonally. When his body was in the air, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The first in charge didn't faint on the spot like Zhang Xiaohua. Instead, he quickly walked to his horse, picked up the stirrups and got on the horse. He waved his hand at the military counselor. The military counselor shouted, "Retreat!" Then the second in charge and the third in charge, who didn't make a move, as well as the rest of the people, scattered and ran towards the woods. They were as fast as the ebbing tide and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The people of the Huanxi mountain villa looked at each other in dismay, not knowing what to do. They all looked at the open space in front of them. A moment ago, there were many ferocious experts who wanted to rob them, and even proposed 3 rounds of competition. In a valley not far from the forest, the group of bandits got off their horses and sat cross-legged on the grass. The military advisor smiled and said to the big boss, "Old Zhao, how's my acting as a military advisor?" Old Zhao smiled and said, "Very good. You're worthy of being called a genius. This skill is something that we can't learn. Unlike old Hong, who has the face of a dead man and doesn't dare to say anything for fear of giving the game away." The third boss said unhappily, "I'm not here to act. I'm fine with fighting and killing, but it's hard for me to get into character as a bandit. Since you guys insist on making me do it, then I can only keep quiet." The second boss said, "This Misty School's disciples are really good. The one who fought with me just now is surnamed He, right? He's a nobody, but he actually has good swordsmanship. He almost forced me to use my ultimate move. Luckily, Qi Xiucai stopped me in time and didn't give the game away." Qi Xiucai said, "I knew it. Brother Ma won't admit defeat. We agreed beforehand to find out their strength, so it doesn't matter if we lose. Brother Ma, why take it so seriously? But old Zhao, is that stone cow really so powerful that he could make you vomit blood with one palm?" Old Zhao looked at their concern and smiled mysteriously, saying, "If you guys really think that I was injured by that stone cow, then our act will be extremely successful. According to reliable information, this stone cow has the highest martial arts in their group. If he really used his full strength, he might not be able to win within 100 moves. However, if he wants to make me vomit blood with one palm, then he must be dreaming. I just bit my tongue a little and spit out a little bit of blood, that's all. Everyone suddenly understood, and gave him a thumbs up. Then Qixiotsai said, other than Stone Cow who has the highest martial arts in this group, we already know that. Next is Aunt Qin, we already know her martial arts. However, according to our information, she has been diligent in her studies these past few years, so there shouldn't be too many discrepancies. Old Zhao narrowed his eyes and said, our Lord has said that we don't need to test her too much. This woman has always been cunning, so I'm afraid that she might see through something. Her martial arts have improved, but it's still not as good as Stone Cow's. Don't worry. However, this extra surnamed he is troublesome. Although his martial arts aren't that high, he can still tie down one of our experts. In this way, we don't have enough people. The other disciples are probably the same, so our subordinates should be able to handle them. Qixiotsai, what do you think? Should we wait for our Lord to send more people over, or? Qixiotsai smiled and said, you don't have to worry about this. Our Lord has his own plans. Our operation must be foolproof and must succeed in one strike. No one can escape. Otherwise, if Openg from the Misty School finds out about this, it will be no small matter. Actually, their strength is only at this level. Our Lord has 10,000 ways to deal with them, but in order to not reveal any flaws, he is being careful. Everyone, rest up and wait for our Lord's next plan. Everyone sat up quietly without saying a word. Qixiotsai walked to a secluded area and took out a pen and paper. He wrote something on a slip of paper, then called a man in embroidered clothes and gave him the slip of paper. He then whispered something into his ear before letting him go. The man in embroidered clothes untied the reins from the tree and mounted his horse. He galloped in a certain direction and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was obvious that the horse he rode was very handsome. Please add it to your collection. Thank you that you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.